Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. So today, I'm going to try and better a layperson's perception of ethics, and everyone who watches this channel is probably painfully aware that I struggle to take the esoteric language of continental philosophy from my past 8 to 10 years of doing it and turn it into something that is actually communicable to a human. So yeah. If you haven't read about the will and you don't know anything about transcendental idealism, well, you're in for a treat because this is going to be some layperson-friendly content. That's the idea anyway. So I'm actually going to be joined by one of my mods. She's called Vegan Gaze. You can check out her channel. I'll put it in the description. I don't think I have because I'm a terrible human being, but I'll make sure I will. So yeah, you can check out her channel, which will be in the description. She does content on veganism, and she engages with people on ethics and lots of memes as well. So yeah, So it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. Right. So Vegan Gaze, if you are watching. Called, oh my god, I can hear myself. Right. You're also streaming it, are you? Vegan Gaze. Right. Speaking of which, I'm going to put you in the description. I can actually see you're actually live on my... Right. Go sub to Vegan Gaze, guys. She's got some really great content, even if she's got a terrible accent. So yeah, let's get into it. Hello. 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 Well, I'll see how it is. She's deafened herself. I don't think her accent is bad. I'm only joking. Lua 500. Only joking. She's the one that griefs my accent, actually. Not sharing your guest channel is morally neutral. I know, because I've not created any negative utility in the world, guys. That's what you need to remember. Hiya, Chris. Hiya, question mark. Jack. Ashbeck is what I'm going to call you. Spiritual Psychotherapy Services. That's a very long one. And Trash Carcass. My Little Noodle. Jesus Christ, what are your names, man? Objective morality is right because it makes me feel good. Yeah, this is a much needed video. I'm going to try my best. I swear to God, guys. I'll try. I swear. I'll do my best to try and make this somewhat understandable by the average everyday person. I can't guarantee anything. I might just come out of this conversation sounding even more mental, and you might just go like, "Wow, this was this is really uninformative." I don't think I can hear the stomach here in the words of transcendental idealism again. What about objective idealism? The best form of idealism. Do you think it's possible to be a non-vegan leftist whilst logically consistent? No! I don't. Thanks in advance. Looking forward to it. Oh, thank you for the donation, man. Really appreciate it. Is that yen, by the way? Wait, do you have an accent? It's the rest of the world that... You're right, it is the rest of the world that has an accent. I have no idea what they're talking about. Greetings, D. Lewis. Also, PP Hands. PP Hands! We're actually growing so fast, guys. This channel's gained 2,000 subs nearly in a week. Insane. Alright, come into the only 2 voice on my server. Where the fuck's that server gone? How have I lost that server? Oh, there it is. Two only. Hello? Okay. Flem, I think you need to go into your settings and have a look at your inputs and outputs. That's what I'm thinking's happening right now. Yeah, I muted her. I thought it would just be better for the conversation, really. I think that if anything, we all know it's for the best, you know. Yes, layperson does equal layman. Early stream lad. Oh, yeah, man. Actually, quite early. Ethan, how you doing, man? Actually, Ethan, you're going to become a mod. 1 second. Thank you for your time on Discord yesterday, by the way. Really appreciate taking the time to chat. Yeah, it's no problem, man. No problem.
Hello?
Oh, God, fucking hell. Yes, hello.
Hello.
How you doing, man?
I'm much better now. It's working.
Oh,
I was
right.
about to my B12's efficiency was about to show. I was
the mental inadequacy. You're just like, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Hello,
can I explain ethics to you? Let's see if I can do it. So
yes.
What is it that you actually wanted to know?
Okay, so the reason it would be good for me is because it does come up a lot, you know, when you're talking about veganism, and then someone will go, well, morality is subjective. And it would be good if I could actually understand it from an objectivist position, so that I could be like, actually, I think you're fine. And I could be like you, PP.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, like, you know, it's like a good way to look at it, because to be entirely honest with you, it is a real issue. Like, as a vegan, I know that like loads of people fucking turn up and just want to say morality is subjective so they can continue eating meat. It's funny because it's usually subjective when we talk about animals, but then when we talk about like the Holocaust, it's usually not. So I think that most people are usually inconsistent, even in terms of metaethics. I think a lot of people don't take metaethics seriously, and they just use it as a way to like, well, morality is subjective. I'm just going to leave now. Bye. But yeah, I think you're right, and I think like if you can make a sound argument against it, then it's going to make your life a lot easier. Now, so you want to know what? So what is it that? So what do you know about moral objectivism, like moral realism, and moral objectivism, and moral subjectivism, and moral anti-realism? What do you know about them?
I have no bloody... Like, I listened to people like you. I listened to all the philosophy debates and everything like that, but it just goes through one ear and out the other, if I'm honest with you. But so I'm guessing what the first thing that we'd probably need to do is if you could define all of those terms for me and I could write them down.
Yeah, okay. So like moral realism, like I'll give you like the basic kind of rundown. It's probably like overly simplified. I'd probably say moral realism was the belief that there are moral facts in the world.
Yeah.
Moral objectivism is basically in the name, like there's that those like moral facts can be essentially you can make truth apts. Well, actually, that'd be like cognitive objectivism, but usually cognitivism objectivists are usually cognitivists. So it would be like unfortunately there is a lot of like little niche views. So most objectivists would at least argue that there is a moral metaphysical foundation. So something in the world that exists.
That's metaphysical. That means like it exists in the world.
Yeah, like, well, yeah, kind of, yeah. So like metaphysical.
Kind of. Oh no.
No, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. So like I've never really had to define metaphysics before. It's like, so like
this is the thing, isn't it?
So like the thing is like metaphysics is like first concept. So like metaphysics used to be understood as like things that don't change, things that like the study of things that don't change, first causes, and things that don't change, first causes, and something else I can't really remember. There's like 3 of them that used to be taken.
Could you give an example?
So what I'm referencing here is ontology. So this is the study of being. So so that which is would be the best would be the best way to describe it. So when we talk about like metaphysics and ontology, we're talking about that
Mm-hmm.
which exists.
Exists. God, yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I'm following.
Right. That's so when we talk about and do you think I'm going too deep already? Fuck. Sorry, the chat's already telling us off.
Like,
Fuck.
I'm already like.
Okay. So like when we talk about like objectivism, we're talking about like think of it like a moral object. Like there would be something in which I could go like that moral fact is right or wrong against that moral object. Now, like it doesn't actually
Okay.
have to be like a ball of goodness. You could say like naturalism, like against human nature and like the nature of like the like beings, the experiences of beings. You could say something like some people are like particularists and intuitionists, where they literally think that they can perceive like a moral reality just in their intuitions. I think they're full of shit, but they exist. PP deep. Oh, fuck. Fuck's sake,
Yes,
man.
PP, go deeper. Sorry, I'm desecrating the good name of philosophy right here with
No.
my memes. I'm sorry.
All right. Okay. So,
Okay, can I just
on the right track though?
can I maybe should I tell you what my confusion about it is?
Yeah. Go for it. That's probably the best way to go.
So, because we're both agnostic by definition.
Yes.
What perplexes me is how, because I know what I feel to be wrong, right and wrong. I just feel like things like murder, all these horrible things we can think about, right? I think they are horrible.
Right.
I think they actually are. My problem is, because I'm an agnostic and I don't think I can make conclusive statements about what actually is and what...
but that's about like God, right? Like you're agnostic about God?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so if it's about God, like when we talk about what's right and wrong, you don't need God to talk about what's right and wrong.
No, so what I'm saying with that, my point is, because the reason I don't have that belief and I can't conclude is because I think, well, I can't, my brain is just a single entity and I can't give you that kind of something so inbuilt into the creation of everything. I can't conclude that. So how could I then conclude what is right or wrong?
You mean like
does that make sense?
It's like yeah, absolutely. But it's like physics and the theory of everything, right? So if you like think of it like this, when physicists talk about like, separate areas of physics, like Newtonian physics, relativity, like whether like how big the sun is, like how fast the planets are moving, stuff like that. That's like like little facts that exist in the world, which we can come to know without having an understanding of every single possible fact that exists in the world. So like you're absolutely right. You couldn't have like absolute certitude and knowledge of everything because you're not God. But what you can have is knowledge about the world. And if there is an ethical reality, then you can make, deductive arguments about that reality.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, my problem... Yeah, okay.
So, like, if something was right or wrong, so you could say, like, oh, right, well, I don't know what would be the fundamental ethic of, like, the best ethical philosophy that could ever exist. But what I do know is, like, Nazism is worse than like, I don't know, like any pretty much almost everything else. But like I don't know, Nazism's worse than, it's worse to be a Nazi than it is to be a humanitarian, you could say, because you could relate that back to a moral reality. So you could go, look, there is an ethical foundation from which we can gain information about, which would be the experiences of the everyday individual, like whether they're feeling like pain and pleasure, having a good time or not, expressing that subjectivity. And you could get that information and then make a deductive argument against it. Now, if you were to say that, like, was the ethical foundation, then you could show that Nazism was less capable of expressing like subjectivity, or was created worse outcomes in terms of pain and pleasure. Ultimately led to a worser outcome than, something like socialism, or, if someone was like a decent, nice human being, that like maybe, killing the Jews was wrong because ultimately you could show that the suffering of the Jews occurred. And if suffering is wrong, then this increase of unnecessary suffering would also be wrong.
How do you deal with, I'll keep it PG, but basically there are instances where something that would be harmful is not harmful because of,
Right, keep it PG, yeah, okay.
it's just keep it. But how do you deal with that? Like,
okay, so one is a definitional issue. So a lot of people look to, like, one of the big things actually is one of my professors used to bring this up all the time, and he actually studied the ethics of porn and stuff like that. Actually wrote books on like the ethics of porn and like sexual consent. And one of the things that he talks about is when people define, good and bad in terms of pain and pleasure, it's like, is something painful if you're enjoying it, right? Now, he says it's a definitional problem. It's actually not an issue. It's really semantic. So it's not actually painful. It's pleasurable. It's just like, it's actually a positive experience. It's not a suffering.
It's just also painful.
Yeah, it's more
Mhm.
of like, it's a positive and negative relationship, the same as pretty much anything else in reality, but it's characteristically positive, which is why the individual gains enjoyment from it, which is why they're ultimately having a good time and not a bad time. That being said, simply the instance of pleasure mightn't be justified. So if someone has an instance of pleasure from being like beaten severely, but then after that they experience a considerable amount of pain, and then it also puts their life at risk, and may genuinely lead them to like not being able to live or walk again, and so on. What we then have to judge the instance against is like the totality of that person's life. It's not just that individual's preference. It's about the interests of that individual. It's about like the overall arcing value transactions that they have throughout their entire life, not just one moment. So this is where you get what's called narrative theory, where we talk about the narrative of someone's life. So we don't talk about a single instance of someone's life. We talk about the narrative. So if someone's like wanting to be beaten, but ultimately it would lead to a worser outcome for their overall life, we could see that as being irrational against the fact that who they are and what they are is actually psychologically continuous. And so they'll actually, if they were to take an objective view from it, they would see that it would be bringing them a negative experience overall rather than a positive. So like a net negative.
Yeah, so like someone who has an addiction, like the desire and the pleasure that they derive from involving themselves in that addiction, though that may be a pleasurable experiance. So you'd bring in narrative theory then to just explain that.
Yes,
the addiction is
that would be it. Yeah. So like just understanding that that someone who's addicted to like heroin, ultimately, even though it's like a massive like burst of dopamine in their brain, they might feel like amazing for like a few hours, but then ultimately, if it destroys their life, they may feel overall worse throughout their lives. Now, that's that. At least so far, we're talking about what's egoistic. So this is like one form of moral objectivism. So what I would say is that everyone has desire, right? And ultimately already evaluates, pain and pleasure. It's given to them. In the words of John Stuart Mill, I think, no, it's Jeremy Bentham. I think it's Jeremy Bentham. There are two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. And basically what he says is that you cannot deny the positive and the negative experiences of pain and pleasure. So there are what would be called what's the word I'm looking for? Self-evident values in those experiences. That like when you do feel pain or when you do feel pleasure, you cannot help but experience the positive and the negative experiences by definition to make them pain and pleasure.
Right. Okay. So what was his name? Sorry.
That's Jeremy Bentham. He's actually he's the guy that wrote The Question Is Not, Can They Reason, Not Can They Talk, But Can They Suffer?
Oh, was he?
Yeah, so that's Jeremy
Oh,
Bentham.
what a lad! What
Yeah.
a sad lad! That's a sad lad right there. Okay, all right, cool. Maybe I could ask some questions because people did give some questions and I didn't know how to answer them. Would you be up for them?
Yeah, absolutely. If
Okay.
like, and if there's anything obviously that I can explain to a greater degree, because like in reality, this is like the iceberg, like it's like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to
Yeah.
ethics. Like unfortunately, like you see when you like explain the definitions, it's like I can explain the definitions, but then like
You have to explain it with something else.
that's the
And
thing that comes to a point
yeah.
where it's like I'd be better off really just like taking you away from where you're at, rather than like just explaining ethics itself,
Yeah. Yeah. But hopefully, like, at the end of this, you could recommend me some books and I could go away and have a little read, cheeky read, and then see what I've learned. But
Yeah.
some people asked, so a few times Plato's dilemma came up. I'm sure you're familiar with that. They apparently Cosmic Skeptic brought it up as a problem with theistic objectivism.
Sorry, say that again. Cosmic Skeptic brought up what about theistic objectivism?
He brought up objectivism, theistic objectivism being an issue, and he brought up Plato's dilemma.
By Plato's dilemma, do you mean the Urethral Dilemma? So that's
I don't know if they do, but
the Urethral Dilemma is essentially it's essentially a question: is something good because God commands it, because God says it is good, or is it good and so God says it, and so God
yeah.
And the problem is with theistic a theistic understanding of morality is that if you take God to be saying something is good, then God could command something which we would perhaps perceive as bad. For example, killing your son, and that be justified. He could command you to go and be a suicide bomber, and that be okay. On the other hand, if you say that some good is separate from God, then why do we need to be theists in the first place? The remedy for this is to say that, and I think it's kind of given in the Christian understanding of it, that God is good, and so when we talk about goodness and God, it's not that God is saying something is good; it's that they are actually occurring simultaneously, and so describing them as separate, as saying that like, is God saying it is good and therefore it is good, or is it good and therefore God says it is good? The remedy for that situation is saying that God God can only say that which is good because God is good. It's like goodness is God, and it remedies the situation essentially. It doesn't. I don't think that it's a real issue anymore in terms of theistic ethics. Don't get me wrong. I don't argue for a theistic approach. I argue for a secular approach. So in other words, I don't think we need a God. I actually did a video on that. We do not need morality. Does not need to be objective. Morality is objective even if there is no God. So yeah, we don't need the existence of a God for morality to be objective. And I would ground it. I would ground it essentially in nature and the experiences of the individual. So yeah.
Can you just, so when people say ground it, I understand it in context, but could you explain precisely like what that means? I know that sounds like a silly question.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So grounding is essentially providing what's called sufficient reason. So sufficient reason is the explanation of why something is the way it is. So it's so if I was to say like the laptop is on the table, the sufficient reason for that would be because I put it there. And then the sufficient, like, you could go all the way back to the laptop being made and all the way back in a series of causes until you hit what would be called the first cause, or an infinite regress of causes. So this is where people say the first cause has to be God a lot of the time. And that's why they try and say like, there must be a creator in order to remedy the infinite regress of causes. Not convinced by that. But yeah, like this is that's providing sufficient reason. So that's sufficient reason. Then you've got what's called necessitated. So like you've got sufficient, which is to show why something is the case. Then you've got or like something, why something could be the case. And then I think, how do I put this? Necessitated is it must always be the case. So the laws of logic. For us to make an argument in the first place, the laws of logic must function. So any argument which tries to dismiss the laws of logic ultimately dismisses itself, and is self-defeating, which is like why Fourier skepticism ultimately breaks itself down. And so what you end up with is necessitated grounding. So it's like there must be something because they're like so. For example, you would have to always say that there is something. What that is not necessarily any given thing. And at the end of Descartes' like reasoning, it's just a thinking thing. Ultimately, there must be some sort of foundation in terms of reality, in terms of being, for us to even be able to talk in the first place, to even think and engage in reality. Something must exist. It's undeniable, so it's necessitated. The laws of logic are another necessitated first principle. So you basically say like, I wouldn't be able to make an argument or understand reality if the laws of logic didn't function. I wouldn't have any, so I wouldn't be able to make an argument against it. So yeah, the sufficient, which is like to show like the grounding of something, why it might be the case, like why, like to prove like what's happened in terms of a first like set of causes, and then there's necessitated, which is like what always must be true, which cannot be denied.
Okay. And you'd say so in like a roundabout way, you can't be a theistic objectivist because your grounding's in God, which is circular, isn't it? Like, isn't that just completely circular?
Why? Because
you're saying
sorry,
it is good. Because you're saying it, like, because they say the things that God says are good because He said them and He is good.
Yeah, but
that sounds.
It is kind of circular, but they would say that it's tautologically true. So there's a difference between something being circular in the sense of it being circular and trying to self-prove, and circular in the sense that it is one and the same thing. So like, for example, a bachelor is an unmarried man, or just like I don't know, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a
probably better human real world one would be cool.
1 + 1 = 2 is a tautology, because 1 + 1 is 2. Like it is literally the same thing written, well, depending on which interpretation of tautologies you go down, whether it's the Kantian or the Humean one, but it's the same thing written on both sides, just in two different forms. Now, that would be a tautology, which means it's true by definition. It's analytically true.
Okay.
So
and they
would argue that God had to be good, and then you've got to give a reason why God must be good, and why He must be perfectly good, in order to instantiate that position. So then you could say that God could never command something which was bad because God is good. It would be logically impossible. And then some people try to like pull up God being like omnipotent, and say that. Like people try to say like pull up God being omnipotent and say that, well, look, God can't be limited by the laws of logic, otherwise He's not omnipotent. But then the missing the point. It's like the word God, for any of this to make sense, the laws of logic have to be implied, and so like even in terms of logical limitations, they must apply to God, and that still not limit His power, because even for the power to make sense, it would require the laws of logic to function. And I think there's actually somebody did a really great response to Cosmic Skeptic on that exact point, and I'll have to fish it out, because Cosmic Skeptic actually even hosted him on his channel. So yeah.
Oh, okay. But you can't think of who it was?
I can't think of who it was at the top of my head. It was another small channel as well. It was another small channel. I can find them. I can definitely find them.
Okay.
But yeah.
So
sorry.
We went through the tautology of 1 + 1 = 2. Do you have the other example of what would be circular? Like begging, so the other one would be begging the question, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there's begging the question, which is like essentially trying to prove some, like it presupposes the conclusion, and then you've got like a tautology, which is like true by definition. So God is good would be saying like good is good for the Christian, but they would have to obviously give a secondary argument to show that God actually is good and why He must be that way. So show why it is sufficient or necessarily the case.
Okay, Right. That makes sense to me how they okay. So someone else asked, if what is right or wrong is objective, then why is my perception of morality dependent on my personal unique experience / past?
Well, your perception of like physics is dependent upon, your past and your personal experience. Like the reality is that what you are is a subjective first person entity engaged in the world. Like ethics itself can be an objective field, which is studying something which is separate from your interpretation, but your studying of it is from a first person subjective standpoint. So like just saying like, all right, like the way I feel, like I might feel like the world's flat. It doesn't make it flat. It's just the same thing.
Yeah, it's just there's a kind of difficulty in my head. So I could say, right, I could say like my table is white, or just pretend it was blue, and that I were colorblind, and that it were actually green.
Right.
It's like, well, how have we? Like, I think maybe I get too confused about it, because it's like, well, we've come to accept what blue and green is essentially by appealing to I guess popularity on who can see blue and what that looks like.
Well, I think that what we'd be doing is appealing to common experience. And so
Right.
what we would say is that like, and this is the same with everything. So when we talk about, let's say the size of like, I don't know, like what is a meter? Like that's a standard measurement in reference to a certain given distance and a standard within the world, which is agreed upon by a set of individuals. So ultimately, I would say that a meter is, like, I can objectively talk about what a meter is in the sense of how great of a distance it is in the world from point A to point B. But that's relied upon subjects coming to agreement about the standardized measurements from which we discuss. Now, I don't think that proves anything other than our language and our what's called the signifiers of our reality, or like signification, is separate from the objects which they are signifying. So unless, like, what I can say is that there is a problem with interpretation and perception, that is fair enough, but we are actually perceiving a real world, and that real world that exists common between us exists a certain amount of distance which we could claim is a meter. And I would say the same thing could be done with ethics in terms of the existence of something that is right and wrong.
Okay. So do you think, well, I'm trying to ask, so do you think then that subjects, because someone did ask, so you have like professors studying philosophy, just out of curiosity, are they usually objectivists or subjectivists?
Objectivists. They're usually
They
moral
are
realists.
usually.
Yeah, like
Okay.
it's not, it depends on, like, from what I've seen, from 56% to 70% are objectivists, are moral realists.
Okay.
So some people just call a bias, because obviously many of us would want the field to be objective because that's what we do, you know.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's just a contention in society, and I think that if you want a great book on why subjectivism is wrong, like a good, like, on telling why subjectivism is wrong, be like After Virtue, the first few chapters of After Virtue by Alistair McIntyre. I recommend it all the time. It's just brilliant.
Alistair McIntyre.
Yeah, Alistair McIntyre. Like, brilliant.
By the way, for the people listening, the word he's trying to say is book, but he's really northern and he struggles with words.
How do I say book? Book?
You go book.
Book.
It's
got two O's in it, hasn't it?
Book.
Cook book.
Okay, sorry. I love it. I just wanted to do some English translation, just because you don't speak proper English.
I speak English fine. Chat, have me back here. Come on. Getting called out by my guest.
Sorry. Sorry. Oh, I'm not a mod anymore on your channel, am I?
I was going to say, you're getting removed after this. This is. But is there any? Sorry, continue. Go on.
Yeah. So objectivists would potentially use things such as narrative theory and perhaps other things to explain that maybe the reason so many people are subjectivists is because they're kind of like limited to their own experience and feeling.
Well, that's I
That
think
causes them
usually
to.
I think subjectivists usually they usually rely upon the arguments in terms of so there's what's called epistemics, which is the study of knowledge. So usually arguments in terms of moral anti-realists rely upon an argument which can defend a special pleading in terms of the epistemics of moral realism. So in layman's terms, that means that there is no such thing as facts, and that and they rely upon no such thing as moral facts rather. So they'd be like, right, there's no such thing as good, bad, right, and wrong, and here's why, and they'd have to make the positive claim as to why, because because it's the law of the excluded middle. You have to basically instantiate a claim that is a negative, just the same as you would a positive. Just because you're skeptical of the claim, like murder is wrong, just because you can be skeptical of it doesn't mean that it's not true or truth apt, capable of obtaining truth value. So you have to show why it wouldn't be. And so a lot of moral subjectivists, they use arguments relating to things like a lot of the famous ones were like logical positivists.
Right.
Those error theorists. Trying to think of some other ones off the top of my head.
I feel like positivists. Like I studied them in sociology. I'm sure.
The Vienna Circle. So
That is ringing a bell. I don't know why.
AJA. So what they argued is that a statement could only be. AJA argued that in logical positivism, that a statement could only be meaningful if it could be. What was it? Oh, how does he say it again? I'll have to, because it's there's strong and weak positivism. Was it a statement could only be meaningful if it could be proven? If it could be proven, as in verified. If it could be verified, verification. I'm thinking of verification, and then there was verification.
I think that's what it was about. It was about verification. That's the term that's like coming up when you said positivism. Yeah, I think that's what it was. I don't know why that was like linked, but so can I?
Yeah, go.
Just ask afterwards or now. When you say strong and weak, because I've heard you say it.
Yeah.
Are you saying like a strong case for it? Is that what you're saying? Like,
no,
what's the strength?
Strong and weak is like strong and weak is really a difference in terms of the argument, where the argument would be applicable to all cases or like some cases usually. So strong and weak would be like in terms of the verification principle, and it was a way to argue against God really, but actually ended up basically arguing against science and history as well. Basically argued that that a statement was only meaningful if it could be proven, if it could be verified through it was empirically verified. I think they said, and then they realized that was so bad that it actually basically prevented the argument itself from functioning, because the argument itself couldn't be verified. So
okay, that makes sense.
So then the like AJA basically posited what was called weak verification, where he said in principle be verified, but then that made the argument essentially totally useless, because in principle just means like if there was it could possibly be verified. So like if I could go back in time 500 years ago, I could find out like whether like this was the case or something. It's the same thing with like the existence of God. God could in principle verify his own existence. So you end up with like basically a strong and weak is more of like the philosophical application of the argument, like whether it's applicable to all cases or some under a certain like subsect of like criteria.
So weak would be it can only be applied to some.
Yeah, pretty much.
Strong would be okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah.
But like a lot of people, really in terms of ethics are like non-cognitivists or subjectivists. So that's usually the people who you're probably going to come up against, and they're going to say that morality is about emotions, and they're going to propose usually. I'm trying to think of so there's J.L. Maki's error theory. So like error
Oh, I've
theory,
heard that.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's Maki's error theory. There's I'm trying to think of who else. There's logical positivism in terms of like AJ Ayer. But usually the rely upon basically almost all of them either rely upon making an epistemological case that we could not know something was good or bad because we don't know what the as in the statements themselves are not truth apt. So that means like the statements themselves are not capable of gaining truth value. So like if I was to say like the sun is 500,000 miles away, then I could basically measure that. And by measuring that, I could show that it is the case. And I could point to that distance in reality, which is common. So they would, like, a lot of them would say that that would be a truth apt statement that would obtain. Now, if I was to deny the existence of, like, the sun, if I was to say the sun didn't exist, I'll be denying the metaphysical foundation which would allow that argument to function. And that would be, like, the error theorist. That, like, from what if I'm saying that. If I'm taking that position right, actually, let's just make sure check. Yeah.
Fact check the pee-pee.
Yeah, like
Pee-pee could be wrong.
I actually have to double check. Chat, correct us if I'm wrong, because it's been a while since I've read was it making the right and the good or constructing the right and the good from Maki. But essentially I'm pretty sure from what I remember, it's a metaphysical argument in terms of the non-existence of let's see, I'll just remind myself one second.
Okay.
The argument from disagreement begins with an empirical observation that there is an enormous amount of variation in moral views, and that moral disagreements are often characterized by an unusual degree of intractability. So basically, he points towards that there is no phenomena from which to reference in terms of something being truth apt or not, and so it's not that it's meaningless; it's that it will never obtain an object in terms of a metaphysical instantiation of the truth. So, like, if I was to say that the sun is 75,000 miles away, I would point to the sun and the earth, and I can measure the distance, and that's something that we could all discuss. In terms of ethics, he's saying, like, basically there is nothing to point towards, and so how would I know if something is good or not? Because, like, there is nothing to measure that against, that goodness against. So that's like error theory. And then you've got voice break. And then you've got like I'm trying to think. And then you've got like other ones that are like epistemics. So then you'd be saying that like the statements themselves do not make sense, and a lot of people try to argue that that's because something saying like murder is wrong is only in reference to like an expressive emotional state. So like they're gonna say that the word wrong is actually an expression of one's distaste in the concept of murder.
So they're looking at it more from a place of disgust, like an emotive, Yeah, that's my difficulty. That's why I want it to be the case that there is objectivism, because then I can be like, look, facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah, exactly. Go full on Shapiro, like, this is the thing. Like, what I would say is facts kind of do care about your feelings, and this is kind of the point. Like, I would say like it when we talk about something being good and bad, what we're really referencing is something being in terms of being like, so if I was like just to get a colloquial definition of good, it's like to be desired or approved of, right? And what it relates to is what's called like axiology, which is value. And so it's an evaluation of the world. So to say something is good implies an evaluation of something being good. Now, what the real question is good by what standard? And what I would say is there is a standard given, and this is actually in a little essay you could read. And believe me, chat, I know you're all going to hate me saying this because I know a lot of you are socialists, and I'm about to tell you about someone who's like right wing as fuck. But she writes one good thing, and it's called The Virtue of Selfishness, and it's by Ayn Rand. She's wrong in terms of egoism, but what she shows is that you cannot help but desire and value those experiences of like pain and pleasure. The same thing that Hobbes does in the Leviathan. He says that you cannot help but desire that which is desirable, and so it's necessarily grounded. Like there is, like you cannot avoid the positive and negative experiences of pain and pleasure, and so when you try to deny them, in the words of, I think, is it Bentham, all you end up do is basically instantiating them more.
Right. Okay. Okay, that makes it. I will read that as well. I've got the Virtue of Selfishness and Rand, but then ignore her on egoism.
Ignore. Just, I mean, for the love of God, never read her politics. It's absolute cancer. But like
Okay.
like and the chat and Rand Re. yeah. Like I know she's terrible, but at the same time, she makes some really great points about like one of the things she shows is that look, you can't help but desire like that which is desirable kind of thing, but like you don't just desire a given moment, like a given like experience, and basically she pulls it up to there is something, even if we take an egoistical stance, even if we relate this purely to the expression of value within the individual, which is what subjectivists usually try to do, there is a standard within the individual that is separate from their interpretation, which is like the nature of the individual. So the being or the ontology of that individual in egoism is the foundation of right and wrong, whether it will or will not produce a better outcome for that person. So that's egoism. That everyone is trying to maximize the outcome for themselves, and sort of maximize the outcome of them for themselves, they have to understand themselves.
So they can understand their desires.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay. You said I would often come across subjectivists and non-cognitivists, right?
Yeah, so like non-cognitivists believe that it's purely expression. So that like they believe that good and bad do nothing but like basically take boo hurrah, in the words of oh shit, who was it that said that? Boo hurrah theory. Shit. It wasn't Blackburn, was it?
Oh no, you tell me.
Was it Blackburn? It wasn't Blackburn, was it? It's Emotivism, but I can't remember who's it by. It wasn't AJ Air who first said boo hurrah, because it was somebody else. Oh my god, I can't remember who said it first. I don't think that necessarily matters, but I just feel bad because
No, maybe not.
But basically Emotivism, that there is like it wasn't Stevenson, was it? It might have been. It was someone. I'm definitely gonna have to find that out later because it's gonna fucking kill us. It wasn't Moore. That's gonna genuinely kill us. Moore was an objectivist, twisted hippie. Like he actually believed that like there was a good and bad. It just was intuitional. It definitely wasn't G.E. Moore. We're gonna have to fight about that because it definitely was. Anyway, the so like boo hurrah theory basically is like I think this is good, or like I feel that this is good and I feel that is bad, but ultimately you've got to make a case which defends that it's just an emotion, that the statement good or bad doesn't relate to something else. So they have to make usually a negative case to why it could never be in relation to something like the nature of the individual or the nature of all individuals. So as a vegan, what you want to do is relate it to the expression of sentience, like the experience of all sentient beings, right? Mm-hmm. Now, what they would have to do is show as well why that couldn't be the case, why it has to be emotion. So if someone just says like, look, morality is all emotive, well, you go, why? Why do you think that? Like, because they're making a positive claim as well. So don't like let anyone as well, like when they go like morality is subjective, say why. Why is morality subjective? Right? Because ultimately, which is why I recommended reading Alistair McIntyre, because he basically tell you how to take all the subjective arguments apart. And if the subjective arguments fail, then we're talking about a form of moral realism and a moral objectivism. Then because of the law of excluded middle usually. Regardless of the form. So it changes the ball game where they basically can't go, well, it's all about emotions, right? Like it's all about how I feel in the scenario. And it's like, well, why do you think that? Because otherwise you're just asserting that morality is like that. You're going to have to make an argument of why morality is different from other knowledge claims. So what you would then accuse them of is what's called special pleading. That there is something different about morality that is not that is and they'd have to show that it's relevant in terms of knowledge claims, that something's different about morality than compared to something like history, physics, and so on, if their argument would also take them apart. So a lot of moral anti-realists fail at what's called the companions in guilt argument, in which companions in guilt basically says, look, if the mechanism that you are using to deny morality applies to like physics, biology, history, chemistry, whatever other field of knowledge or any other field of epistemics, then you must also deny the existence of knowledge, those knowledge claims as well. And most people don't want to say science is isn't objective, and so they'll usually back down. But yeah.
Okay. But so, because the reason I was like, oh, I want to talk about objectivism with you, because when Vegan Gains and the other guy were having the debate, the professor, basically, you kept saying, well, you didn't keep saying you weren't happy with it, and I actually understood your frustration with that. I just thought, God, because they're just going back and forth and they're not making a point.
Yeah.
But if you were talking to the professor, what would you have told him? What would you have said, like when he said all the things he did about it just being about, because he said it's all about your desires or something?
Well, yeah, like I would have actually, with the professor, I think he would have accepted. He took an evolutionary biology approach, so he's not going to reject that we are desirous beings. So if I say that there is a desire, then I would say that like desire implies that there is something desirable, and that is and that something desirable, is we desire that which is good and avoid that which is bad by definition. And so. What I would say is if we actively seek to avoid pain and seek pleasure, are they not two objective characteristics of the world from which we can build a theory of ethics on? Because it's measurable, it's understandable, and it's then not subjective. Because he was trying to say that it was both subjective and then related it to an evolutionary biological approach, which is nonsensical. It's like an evolutionary biologist who tries to ground good and bad in the expressions of desires of a given animal would basically be saying like, look, what's good for a pig is, I don't know, lots of tasty, I don't know what the hell pigs eat actually. I don't know. Pretty much the same as
they're omnivores, aren't they?
Yeah, so like lots of nice, tasty food,
anything.
Warm shelter, and so on. Right, the pig will be happy. They'll be experiencing pleasure. Right. What's bad for the pig is being stabbed. Right, and that's what good and bad means. Right, from arguably from an evolutionary standpoint, from what he was arguing. But that would be like an objectivist theory where you go like, look, good and bad is individual, but objective. Now that would be like egoism. Now, subjectivism implies that good and bad are actually just words that represent emotive states within the individual rather than real life values. So it can't be the case that it is good for the pig to eat food and also be the case that the word good is dependent upon my expression of good.
Right. Okay. Because when I'm thinking about these things, I can't help but think. And I'm not about to appeal to nature here, don't worry. But I can't help but think bare bones primal nature. There are bad things that happen in nature, and there are bad things entailed in nature to aid nature's succession, right? Because in nature it seems that the purpose is to just multiply, duplicate over and over again, and that comes at the cost of bad. Would you say then, sorry if this is not really related, but would you say, I don't know what I'm trying to say, that basically objectivism is kind of like anti-nature, and it's like a progression of
I'm actually a naturalist.
Humans coming away from it?
Well, I'm actually a naturalist. So
Okay. Okay.
I'm actually
All
going to
right.
say that what is good is in reference to nature, that you are given it by nature. So then
Okay.
what I would say is that the evaluation of the world from which pain and pleasure, that's actually given by what you are, in terms of your being. You can't deny the positive and negative experiences of pain and pleasure, in which
No.
case they are axiologically grounded necessarily. So then, if I go like the value of pain and pleasure is good and bad, and you can't deny that, at least towards that individual, they'll go, yeah, I don't think anyone tries to. Like, the very few people that do. In which case, it's objective, at least in an egoistical sense, right?
Right. Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the conception of species or the passing on of genes on whether they're going to have children or not. It has only to do with the experience of the individual who experiences
Hmm.
the value. So experience implies an experiencer. And so when we talk about good and bad, it's actually always in reference to an agent or a patient, rather, an individual who's actually experiencing those values.
Hmm.
Or,
Yeah, I wouldn't appeal to nature, as you know. It's just
yeah.
it comes up a lot, doesn't it, when you're
Yeah.
talking about vegan conversations? Like they want to be like, well, it's an inevitability. Bad is like, but then even then, they're granting that bad is bad. So I guess it's not
It's
too
like
relevant.
well, like sometimes people use the words like, so like pain can be good for a species.
Hmm.
Now what I would say is like, what do you mean by good for a species? And then I would lead it down to like what's called like the is-ought distinction, where they'd have to show that necessarily they can derive an ought from an is. So I'd have to be able to go, if a species ought to try and maintain itself, or a species what is good, we ought to do what is good for a species, um, or for our own species.
Hmm. Yeah, is all. I understand that the is all thing totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, and that's
But I
like
hope
the
so.
whole thing when you're saying you wouldn't appeal to nature. Like I know you get it, but I'm just like kind of making the distinction clear for those like obviously who are watching
Hmm.
as well. Like even if we appeal to nature, like even if we're a naturalist, there's a separation between that which is necessitated and sufficiently provable in terms of that which is good by definition, and that which is assumed to be good. So like if I assert a notion of good that doesn't relate to the value experiences of individuals, I'm going to accuse that person of begging the question.
Okay. All right. Okay. I feel like some of this is going in. Could you
It's
just?
sorry.
It's just. It's the issue. I'm seeing it like like a freaking massive book. It's got all these terms, and then you need to know the term before you can add it and explain it in. And I think that's the problem.
I
Like,
think the real
I
problem
understand.
is that loads of people like to go morality is subjective and they've done no metaethics in their life. It's like, look, I think Destiny is really nice in terms of like how he approached the conversation and stuff. Like, really cool guy. But at the same time, when I was talking to Destiny, he was like, look, I hate metaethics. Why would do metaethics? And it's like, well, you're the one that's doing metaethics in the first place by like denying moral realism. So you're the one making the claim that morality is not objective, that there are no moral facts, and so you're the one that's then entering metaethics because you're saying like, well, there is no morally true statement, and so you're the one that's led we're into metaethics. So then it's like, right, well, look, the problem is that so many people they make claims about morality and ethics, but they haven't read anything.
No, no, no. Yeah, that's why I've always been very unsure of it. It's just when it comes to things like what is, I think my brain just kind of spirals because it's like, well, how can my puny individual human brain like conclude this? That's where it just kind of
Well,
gets a bit difficult
this
for
is
me.
where you
That's
get
why.
what's called like a dialectic, and I think that as long as it
Mhm.
can like fit in a dialectic in terms of like a function and logical argument. So if you could show that like something is valuable and must always be valuable, because like ethics really is pertaining to behavior, right? That's what the word means. Like so, ethics is like ethikos pertaining to behavior, and that's based around seeking something which is good and then avoiding that which is bad. Essentially, maximizing good and bad, or maximizing good and minimizing bad within our lives. Trying to achieve the good life, in other
S-
words.
Sorry, when you said ethikos, so you're talking about like logos, pathos, or the four, isn't it? Or
Um,
is that just something completely different?
no, it's different. Yeah, that's different. It's
Okay, that's
ethikos.
fine.
Ethikos is just the way that the Greeks defined ethics.
Yeah, okay.
And the reason that it's an important distinction is because people in society today look at morality as if it's something like an object or a noun. So when they talk about morality, they talk about it as if it's a noun. So they look for something which is good in terms of like they look for some sort of moral thing. Where they like point towards morality. Then, if I point towards physics, I've got this material like in front of us. So point towards morality, and it's like you've missed the entire point. The reason that it moved towards morality is actually it was a linguistic movement that happened like after Christianity became the dominant ideology, but morality was based on the word moralis, which was based on the word ethikos from the Greek. So moralis and ethikos mean pertaining to behavior, which is essentially the understanding like of how an individual should act in relation to their life. It's not making a claim about that like about anything other than the individual's behavior and how they should behave. Morality is understanding that which is like when we talk about morality, we're talking about like good and bad, right?
Hmm.
Now the Greeks just took good and bad like in almost like pretty much at face value, except for Plato, who then like kind of create like the good and the bad, like kind of well, it's actually more like the good, and like I don't think he even talks about like the bad because I don't think he says it as a form. So it's like the good, and because he's relating it to like universals and like so it must be like an object which is pure in and of itself and only understood by reason. But that led into Christianity, and so we started like talking about the moral of the story. And the moral of the story was the good thing that which we learned. And so we started like talking about morality as if it was a noun. And so people start talking about their morals, their principles, when in reality it always related to the ethics of when it was based on ethics, it was about the behavior of that individual actually achieving an overall good outcome. Now, what I would say is that because of this movement, people, when they would say something is good, like God is good, or the succession of the species is good, or it's good to be polite or whatever. All of these concepts were built on nouns. Like it's a noun in relation to like some sort of presupposed understanding of good, and that's really unfortunately been a product of language rather than any actual anything to do with the actual field itself. And
Yeah,
so
this limitation of the language is infinite.
yeah,
So,
exactly. So
yeah.
the reality is that when people talk about good and bad, they usually have these issues where they run into problems where they're like, well, this is just asserted. Everyone's saying different things are good and everyone's saying different things are bad. And it's because the reality is the Greeks already took good and bad to be the values that you experienced in your life. They're not something that has anything to do with some like an assumption of good or bad. It is value itself, and that value is self-evident. Now that's like I think how people really should be approaching ethics, and that really a lot of the problems in terms of anti-realism have come around because people have made really dumb claims about what is good and bad, separate from the actual experience of value.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I think people like me, we just need to read more, and we'd understand it. Because otherwise, you're just kind of playing this game of like, oh God, I hope that they care about the well-being of others, which doesn't seem to really
Well,
like.
no, you just go to like so like most people will make some sort of claim. So like if they care about themselves. So if you just go like, all right, so like I don't know, like if they go like I don't care about animals, and you're like, all right, why not? And they're like, oh well, it won't benefit me, or anything, or something
That
like
happens
that.
a lot.
Yeah, so like it
Hmm.
won't benefit me. I'm like, oh, why do you care about that which benefits you? And then just pull them down to the point in which they go like, oh well, I can't really like I can't really like help or care that which happens to me, and then build them up from there. So that's when you'd go like, right, so
Yeah.
since you care about
Okay.
yourself, how do you understand what's good for you, and why do you think that that's what's good?
See, I have done that, but I haven't like extracted it. Like I haven't tried to extrapolate it to that point. But I do. It's been more of a kind of like layman of like, yeah, you care about yourself, but like, I end up going down the route of, but if you care about yourself and you want to be protected, then how can you not expect that to be the case for others? But I guess I could
Yeah.
extrapolate it in that
So
way.
most people do that in terms of what's called social contract theory, where they basically go, we
Yeah.
all want, a certain level of like safety and security in society, and so if we agree on like laws, it might be appearing to restrict freedom, but ultimately it's making sure that I'm safe and you're safe, and we're actually agreeing on something that's like a non-aggression pact or something like that, right? In terms of like libertarianism, they talk about that all the time. But like in terms of like it's what's called social contract theory. It's it's a contract from which we all enter in for I think John Rawls calls it a venture of mutual advantage. Okay, and he basically says, but then that social contract presupposes that we already know what's in our interests, and that's the kind of the argument against it. That there's two things: that like we already know what's in our best interests, which is demonstrably false. People actively harm themselves all the time,
Yeah.
regardless about doing their own interests. Like heroin addicts are a good example. And then there's the Hegelian approach to social contract theory, which is to show that before we've even got to the point of accepting that someone can sign a contract, we've already had to accept them as having the possibility of owning property and being able to have experiences of good and bad in the first place. We've already attributed to them the value that we experience in ourselves. And so when we talk about their capacity to enter a contract and fulfill a contract and be a property owner, we've already equated them as being equal to us in capacity. And so when we go, oh well, it's signing a social contract, it's like you didn't need to sign a social contract. You already knew that the mattered before you've signed the contract.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a given. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm gonna have to like watch this back quite a few times because the way it's difficult for me to hold on to knowledge if I can't picture it.
There's also the
You
fact
know,
that I'm bombarding you with like 6 years or something's worth of like ethics. So
you're
like I
drilling
wouldn't
it.
really like take it like it's honestly it's incredibly difficult because like when you say like someone's a subjectivist, and the reason like Destiny accused like me, Rem, and Marty of this, he's like, why is it that every time I talk to a fucking objectivist, they try and like
Every time.
yeah
Yep.
every time I talk to them, they've got to like he's actually really genuine about it. He's like, why is it got to be like so so like meta, and it's got to go like through like a massive theory and stuff like that. And it's in reality it's because the subjectivist has pulled back to first principles, and from
Of
first
your
principle.
feelings,
Well,
right?
that's the thing. They've got to go like they've had to go like, look, morality is like there's no such thing as morality. What is ethics? And then you've got to explain what ethics is in its entirety, and you've got to do that from
Yeah.
a logical foundation. So you've got to go like from first principles all the way up. So you've got to go like, well, we agree on logic, yeah, and like yeah, and we agree we're subjective agents, yeah, yeah, and then you've got to build it up like at every single like point. You've got to build a dialogue, a dialectic, showing that something must be the case. And so it seems incredibly complex, but it is complex because ultimately it's, as in the way Rem put it, it's basically akin to a form of higher order mathematics where you're basically explaining like step by step a very long equation which leads you to the conclusion in the end. And so ultimately like it's not something where you can just point to and go like if I wanted to, I just go like, look, are you going to tell me that pain and pleasure aren't good or bad, like aren't valuable, that you can't value them? And if you do that, you can just go like, yeah, yeah, I don't think they're valuable. And then you get the Sam Harris that's like, well, put your hand on a stove, but he's actually right in the sense that you couldn't help definitionally from saying that it was painful or pleasurable to engage in a certain activity if you experience that the value itself is inherent to your subjectivity, and for you to be a subjective agent, for you to basically be a person, an evaluator within the world, we've already implied positive and negative values. So this is kind of this is kind of like the issue. You always like as an objectivist, you're always going to get this is why Ask Yourself and Vegan Gains always just go like, oh, fuck all of that, right? And they go the Peter Singer route, which is like, you already believe in something, right? And I'm going to find out what that is. And if you're not consistent, then I'm going to shoot you. And that's kind of the idea, which is fair enough, right? But a lot of the time, people are like onto that, right? They know you're going to go, well, wait a minute. What do you think's good or bad? And then they're going to go something like, right, well, good and bad's nothing but emotional expressions, man. And then now you're in that situation where you've got to go, right, ultimately, like a smart moral subjectivist, not many of them are smart, to be fair, from what I've seen on the internet, but I don't think most people who do philosophy on the internet are worth their weight in salt. I think that ultimately it's a lot of people who do it typically talk about these things like systems as subjectivists, right? Which makes no fucking sense if you actually understand what subjectivism is. So a subjectivist shouldn't go like, right, well, it's something good or bad, as in like a non-cognitivist rather shouldn't go like, if is something good or bad, and here's my system as why this is good or this is bad. Like, so I think that chocolate cake is good and eating chocolate cake is good, and here's my system because I like chocolate cake, blah 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 blah. None of that makes fucking sense. In reality, they should just go, it depends on how I feel. Right? Now,
Yeah.
like, none of them normally do that, so you can normally get them out in terms of consistency. But in reality, there's nothing inconsistent about a subjectivist who values something different from moment to moment, because all that matters is their interpretation of that or expressing feelings from that moment
At
to
that
moment.
minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because the thing is, like, I do that, so I'm trying to find the thing of which they value and see if they're consistent on it. But sometimes it feels like, well, why am I like looking for this consistency when it would be just far more powerful to turn it around and be like, well, no, that's just absolutely wrong.
Yeah, like,
I
well, I
would
think
love
the
to
best thing is like, look, they're being skeptics, okay? So just be skeptical about their skepticism. Like, no one ever expects that. So if you just go like, why do you think morality is subjective?
Yeah, because they
like-
think, because it's the thing is, a lot of the time when they're saying these things anyway, because as they haven't read things, we haven't read them. When people seem to say a lot of things as a kind of throwaway filler just for the sake of saying it, so I think it shocks them when you do ask them these questions, like, can you explain?
Yeah, 100%. But that's the thing.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, it's like skeptics are really just poor philosophers. It's really easy, or not. Like, I don't even. Hegel doesn't even think they're philosophers. But it's really easy to take the negative position. Like, to doubt something is really fucking easy. So, like it's like, have you ever read if you want to know how to like go down the whole doubt route, I suggest reading Descartes' like Meditations. Basically, it's it's basically the how to basically how much can we doubt, and he basically shows that you can doubt everything, literally, and like everything, like and if something would only be held true in the Cartesian principle of being true if it is undoubtable, like if it is absolutely necessary, as in cannot be doubted, must be the case, right?
Necessitated.
Yeah. Now,
yeah, okay, yeah.
And it's like certitude, right? It must be absolutely 100% certain, cannot be doubted, always be that way. And what he finds out at the end is that he's left with basically what you basically end up left with, especially after Kant, after he criticizes him and says, like, actually, it's even worse than he thought. You basically end up getting left with, all we can know is that there is something thinking, and that's it, at the end of it. So there is a thinking thing. And you can't even assume who you are, what you are, or what you're doing. You could be a brain in a vat. You could be a disembodied consciousness coming in and out of existence. All of that could be possible at the end of what's doubtable. And this is why when you get to the point of skepticism, it's actually really fucking easy to doubt something. So you just go like, wait a minute, well, what if I'm dreaming right now? And then
that's me all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So you just go, what if I'm dreaming? How do you know that this is like any of this is true? So like some people go like, well, what about your senses? Like I can see this in front of us. I can see this table in front of us, and it's like, yeah, but have you never dreamed a table? There was no table there. So how do you know that your senses are true? You could be in a dream, and then it's like, right, well, the you know, well, what about something like mathematics? That's usually like the highest order sort of stuff. Like what about like geometry? Like no, seriously. Oh, really?
What?
Oh, right. Sorry, I was just getting told something. It's cool.
Okay.
Sorry. So like people a lot of the
Getting
time.
gossip, and you're not giving it to
I know,
me.
I know. And what can I
Don't
say?
spill tea and not give it to me. Unbelievable.
What I was gonna say is like essentially you get like what's doubtable in terms of like in terms of like a triangle existing, for example. Does a triangle have three sides? Can I doubt that a triangle has three sides? And the only way you can do that is if you can doubt your reason. And if you doubt your reason, this is what leads to what's called like Fourier skepticism. You doubt the very reasons that allow you to doubt your reason. But Descartes doesn't go down that route. He basically doesn't come up with that counterpoint. He basically says, yes, an evil demon could be convincing me that all of the conclusions that I'm drawing are in fact correct when they are not correct. And his only way out is to go, well, what if God, it must be God that stops this from happening? Because if the world was this absurd, then like there'd be no such thing as like truth and so on like that. And so like this cannot be the case because God exists, and God would never allow that evil demon to take control like that. And
never.
And so, yeah, like the reality is when it comes to what you can doubt pretty much anything. And so it's really easy to be the skeptic. It's really easy to say morality is subjective. It's really easy to say that, you're the only mind in existence. But it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it the case. And Galen Strawson makes this point in relation to solipsism, which is the belief that you're the only mind in existence. And he says, look, it's true that you can, doubt that you are, like, to the point that other minds don't exist. You can say like, look, there are no such thing as other minds. I have no evidence of it. At least I had no way to prove it without like reasonable doubt, without some doubt. But that doesn't make it more justified. You have to show that it is more likely the case, that it is beyond a reasonable standard that you are the only mind in existence before you should believe that. And it's the same thing with subjectivism. Subjectivists, moral anti-realists, they have to show that morals aren't real, just as much as moralists, moral realists have to show that morality is real. It's what's called the law of the excluded middle, and we both have the burden of proof. So always pull them up on their bullshit as well, because like they get off with it all the time.
Well, I mean, by virtue of the fact that you could doubt everything, isn't that kind of proving that like if someone says like you could just doubt and continue to doubt, and then you're like, no, I don't think you could do that. Like, isn't it one of those things? Is there a term for something that
like doubting your capacity to doubt? Yeah, it's self-defeating. Like that's what I was saying when it was like skepticism. It's like you can be so skeptical that you can like become so skeptical that you can't be skeptical anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's essentially it. Like a self-defeating argument, and that's what happens with a lot of Fourier. That's what's actually Vorsch does that. It's what's epistemic anti-realism. For basically,
well, that's why he annoys me. I didn't know why he annoyed me when I listened to him. It's like I don't have the words to explain why something's annoying.
His position couldn't be the case, because if it was the case, he wouldn't be able to show that his position was the case. So ultimately, it's a self-defeating argument. Like he can never show that his position was actually correct. So like it's one of those things. I think that like a lot of subjectivists won't willingly be epistemic anti-realists. A lot of them will want to say something like, they'll make something like what's called they'll go the is-ought gap. They'll be like, how do you derive an ought from an is?
Yeah.
They'll go I'm trying to think of the other ones, like, so that the built upon that is the naturalistic fallacy, which is G.E. Moore. And he also made what was called the open-ended argument, which is like, why do everyone point at different things which is good, like, and say that they're good? And then that led to Maki's error theory, which is basically like, look, if everyone's pointing to different things and saying they're good, then there is no such thing as good, because there isn't one single thing in which we could go like, yeah, that's good and that's not good, and so it could both be P and not P at the same time, and they could never obtain.
Okay, so I'm wrong in thinking like the Isort gap is something like someone asking, just because something's bad,
Yeah.
why should we then not do it? So I'm wrong in thinking that would be
Yeah, you're wrong. Yeah.
Okay. Classic.
Yeah, the Isort gap
Alright.
would be like so let's say there was like a fundamentalist Christian, and they believed that being gay was wrong, and they were to say, this happens all the time. They break like the Isort gap in the Hume's guillotine, and it's really easy to like slap like a fundamentalist with that. So it's like, they'd say like, it's like an appeal to it's actually an appeal to nature. That's where it actually comes from, really.
Okay.
You're basically saying like, well, you know, they are gay, so it is bad, right? So if you go like premise one, like John is gay. Premise two, being gay is bad. Premise three, we should kill John. You know, and you know, premise one, John is gay. Fair enough. John is actually gay. Absolutely, we can accept that. Premise two, being gay is bad. Why? What about gayness entails that it is negative, or that we ought not to be gay? So from this descriptive fact, why ought we not behave in that way? Like, why ought we not do it? Like, or like another thing is, lions eat meat, therefore humans, they should eat meat. It's like, it might be the case that lions do eat meat, but why is it that if lions eat meat, we ought to eat meat? And so you have to show, if you want to make a natural claim, you have to show that there is an entailed ought claim. So there are two I can actually do. Are you totally up for this? Like, do you know where? Are you following before I go on and explain how to overcome it?
I have not been following for an hour, but you know what? No, I get that. I do get that. And thank you for putting John in harm's way, potentially, instead of myself. I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Obviously. But like the thing is that like, well, this is the thing. I think apparently Sverage is in chat and wants to debate us.
It's nice. I think that's
Am I getting
a fake
trolled?
account.
Am I getting trolled? Nah, surely not.
Nah, he'd love me.
Sverage is something else.
Where does he? Well, his is just one big appeal to. It's not though, because he's like a subjectivist in that sense, because he'll appeal to nature by the. I don't know if he actually is subjectivist or if he's just inconsistent, but basically he'll just be like, "This is good because it's natural," but then he won't be consistent with that.
Yeah, it seems like everything is good because it's natural is what I've seen him argue for. But then he can't show why that which is natural is good. Or why so if you that's essentially it. That's what's called the naturalistic fallacy, which is what G.E. Moore titled like when you say that nature is good, essentially. That's where like appeal to nature is like actually what G.E. Moore created from the is-or distinction by David Hume.
Right.
So essentially, Hume was basically just saying like, look, there is a descriptive fact of the world, and then there is a prescriptive engagement with reality. Why must this descriptive fact entail this prescription? He's like, there is no reason to accept a descriptive fact actually showing why we ought to do something, right? So the only way you can overcome that is by saying that there is already a prescription in nature, that nature has already given us an ought. In the words of Rationality Rules, he talks about axiomatic oughts, like a foundational ought claim. But some people in the literature, this is called the functional concepts, or and there's also supervenance, which is a prescriptive claim which is entailed alongside of a descriptive claim. So for a flower, like this is a functional concept, or this is supervenance as well, right? So, for example, for a guitarist to be a guitarist, he must play the guitar, or she must play the guitar, right? That's essentially like because of the what they are, there is a defined function within them that entails a prescriptive action. Like for a flower to be a flower, it must bloom. There is an entailed action process which is within that description. Now, that's what I would argue for as a moral realist. I would say that there is an entailed ought within us that we cannot help but desire that which is valuable. And by desiring that which is valuable, we need to find out which is most desirable. And the only way we can do that is by engaging with others in ethics and understanding the foundations of value. And in which case, I would say that the only thing that is common and unbiased as a foundation of understanding that which is actually desirable is sentience and subjectivity, which is like the axiological foundation of the terms from which we are using.
Right. Okay. I think I had people had other questions about it. Let me just see if
Yeah.
it's difficult because obviously I'm layman, and sometimes if I understood the knowledge, I would know that the question I can answer it. Do you know what I mean? Or it's already been answered. But so someone said EP talks about the need for language in order to establish morality. So morality cannot be set only with inner reflection. Is this to mean that objective morality is ever evolving as we collectively establish it?
Yes.
Might not be that. Okay.
Yes. So long as this is what's called moral progress. I'm a Hegelian, so some people disagree. This is what's called moral progress. I would say that morality and ethics progress in the exact same way that other fields epistemically do. Same as like science, the same as like mathematics. Pretty much anything which entails an individual learning and understanding the field better and being able to better our knowledge claims about reality. The field progresses alongside that.
Right. But someone said, might that not be subjective, but group subjectivity?
So then that's when you get the claims of what's called socio-political relativism, in which you say that like what's good and bad is actually defined by a group of individuals who are engaged in it. I would say that the difference between socio-political relativism is the separation between what's real and what's phenomenal. So like you can have what's called a contingent language game, in which you assume something to be good and then build up a theory on that. So you could go like or like assume something to be the case. So like if we assumed there was Nazis on the moon, then we could start hypothesizing about the conditions of Nazis on the moon and what they would need to have to be on the moon. So we could start going like, well, if there is Nazis on the moon, they're going to need oxygen, and they're going to need shelter, and they're going to need to do all of these things because of the defined parameters of the Nazis, the moon, and everything which we know to be the case. But there is no reason to believe that there are actually Nazis on the moon in the first place. So all of this could be begging the question.
To be fair, there is reason to believe because they're bloody everywhere. I don't know, and I don't know how they get where they are. So
that's true. That is actually true. I mean, like I have no. I think just before we came on here, I was like, who the hell is a fascist in 2021? Like, what kind of like how like backward have you got to be a fascist in 2021? Like that's inexcusably stupid, isn't it? Really. Anyway, but this is basically what I'm saying is like that would be like a socio-political relativism, right? Where you basically say like, look, there is no such thing as good and bad, but we talk about it as if it's real, and we'll have an assumed foundation of that, and so we've built up a contingent language game about that, and we start making claims about as if it were real. Now that's separate from something like physics, which way the field goes, it's contingent to our language game, where like physics in English is physics in English. It's separate to physics in French and physics in German, but we are all talking about the same thing, which is being a form of something in reality from which we can point towards and go, look, there it is. That's what we are studying. Now, that's the separation I would make between something which is morally real and phenomenal. So if it was like basically what I would say is the moral, like I would argue that our understanding of what is good and bad is in reference to our understanding of nature, the same way as our understanding of physics and the way the universe operates is in reference to our understanding of nature. That doesn't make physics subjective. It does mean that it progresses. It does mean that it's dependent upon culture and the time period in which the individual's in. So physics now is different to physics like 200, 300 years ago, like Newtonian physics.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
all of them have in common the study of the physical universe, just as ethics has in common the study of that which is right and capable of producing value for individuals.
Okay. Yeah. I'm saying yeah, but my brain is going. No, I think so. I'm getting from this that I really just need to read something like After Virtue by Alistair McIntyre. Is that the
Everyone should
case?
everyone should be that. I mean, like, to be fair,
Everyone,
like, it
everyone.
depends. Like, obviously, like, it's hard to explain it like off the cuff, but like basically what I would say, best place to start with these things isn't like a proper book anyway, really, because that's just going to be too much. So I'd say like there's this one set Stanford.
Are you assuming I cannot read? Yeah, true. It's gonna assume quite a lot about the reader.
Well, I'd just say like you need to like they're gonna assume that you have some like some founding in it. So I'd say before you do anything, just I'm just gonna drop it in chat.
But yeah, I've got the chat on thing, so I'll like. Okay.
Right. Ah, my God. Let me pause that. Sorry, just check that out. It's Stanford Encyclopedia on Moral Realism.
Okay.
And they'll explain it in a way that's essentially pretty straightforward. You can go back and reread it, and they'll just get into it in a way that basically shows that there are claims being made. So like a moral realism taken at face value is that a moral obligation to keep its promise is like the claim that Nyx is a black cat purports to the fact that there is true things that as the claim purports. So like if Nyx is a black cat, then there must be a black cat called Nyx kind of thing, right? Same thing as moral realism, that a moral fact exists in the world, and we can point to the metaphysical object of why it is something is good or bad, and like the value in reality. And I would say that value in reality is the experience of individuals that cannot be denied. It would be something that is necessitated.
Could we test your layman right now by doing somewhat of a role play where I am a little carnist who comes along?
Yeah, go for it.
And you like so right? Okay. Right, so PP.
Yeah.
I eat sausage from the bodies of dead animals.
Okay. And okay, so
That's bad.
do you know that the consumption of animal products is unethical?
How can it be unethical though when like morality is subjective? Like you might think it's bad, but I don't think it's bad.
So why do you think morality is subjective?
Because I because I have feelings that tell me whether something's good or bad, and I sometimes think things are good where other people wouldn't. And my evidence really is that you think eating meat is bad, but I think it's really good. So
right, so you think that your feelings can give you an explanation of why morality doesn't exist? It's not an argument, though, is it? Like,
yeah, because that's all we have. Like,
okay.
like that's all I can.
But like, I think
have.
you made at least one good point, which is, people do point towards different things being good and bad, don't they? So why is it that if morality is objective, that people could point towards different things being good and bad? And I'd say that it's exactly the same way that people could point to, different explanations for other phenomena. So like people could explain whether the earth is flat or round. Some people think it's flat, some people think it's round. But whether it is flat or round is something that we can test and evaluate within the world.
You've convinced me I'm vegan now.
Oh, okay.
It's difficult to like speak from that
Bacon
of a
laws,
subjectivist when I'm for me I'm like very stuck in between because again I haven't read, so I need to read.
Well, honestly, like it's go hard solipsist. That would be it, wouldn't it? If someone just went full on like you don't exist.
Yeah, I can't deal with solipsism. I really can't deal with it. It's unbelievable.
Like,
but
yeah, but I mean, like, obviously, like, it depends on them. Like, obviously, like I typically engage with people who are philosophically like literate, at least to some degree.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, the best thing to do is just go Socratic and just start questioning
Yeah.
people like and back and back. So
Everything.
like a lot of the time, like the subjectivists, they always want to take control and doubt your position. Like if you debate, every subjectivist always does that, and it's just because they're scared of you actually doing the opposite. So if you can even make a remotely sound argument for objectivism, then just doubt the shit out of the other person. So
okay. I've noticed that. It's funny that you say that, because yesterday I was talking about that in a stream, about how that really does wind people up the wrong way. If they make a claim and you ask them to explain it, I hate it.
yeah,
It's because like they don't seem to sometimes even believe it or know how to.
it's because a lot of the time they've made assumptions before they've even made the claim. So like if they're like willing to go like something is like good and bad, like something isn't, like there is no such thing as like good and bad. Like they've already made assumptions that like all it relates to is like emotions, and it's like, well, why do you think that? And you have to
like surely like, because emotions are like the chemicals going through your brain and everything, and then like communicating to you that you feel those things, but it's like, well, why? Like, why do you feel those things? It doesn't seem to be explored by them. You could talk about like it being like a natural thing of like, well, pain is bad, and because pain will, and you feel this pain to tell you that that bad thing is affecting you. So like, putting your hand.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would do, is related to nature, and that what I would relate it to, that which must be the case, like sufficiently is the case, and that which must be the case. So if I can prove it, or it must be the case, then that's where I would take it to. And that's where I'd say like a lot of people forget, like in terms of the dialectic, you've got to ground it in first principles, which is why I care so much about metaethics and ethics as a whole, because the reality is everyone who does normative ethics always gets in arguments about stupid hypotheticals, and both sides normally end up like, well, what if wizards existed? Like,
what if aliens came down and tried to like,
and so like they end up in these stupid niche.
That's like an AY. That's like an AY vegan gains. Okay. Okay.
They end up in these like really niche positions, right? And the reason for that a lot of the time is because they're having this fundamental disagreement. They're talking past each other. They're using words that they haven't even agreed upon. And so when they're talking about words like good, bad, right, and wrong, they mean totally different fucking things. So when they're actually trying to converse, there is no conversation, there's no discourse. And so to even have a conversation, I have to go like, what do you mean by good? It's like when Christians, it's like if you had a Christian and a, like for example, you had like a Christian and an Aristotelian, and they're both talking about soul, and they're having a conversation, and someone goes, well, what? Well, no, the soul is, the immortal, essence of one's being or something. And then Aristotle's like, no, the soul is the purpose of one's life, right? Now, they could both use the word soul without having had that conversation and be talking right past, why can't I feel the soul? And then they'd give different explanations, and then they'd have an argument over why they might understand like where the soul is and shit, and none of that means anything, because they're talking about two separate things. And this is the importance of metaethics, to make sure that we're even talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I find that that's a big problem. Like language, it frustrates me. That's where my expertise is. Well, in the English language, at least.
Because you're an English student, aren't you? Like you.
Grad. But we had to do linguistics and all that stuff. Yeah. But no, I think that is the problem. You do one thing that's really important in debates, and I've noticed it especially recently, is to not assume that the definition has been agreed upon at all. Yeah. And the thing is, this is the limitation of language. It allows you to hide behind terms, because people are going to assume something about the word that you're using. And then when asked to explain, people don't like it. They just want to use the language as that barrier to prevent them from having to get into the meta, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole point of philosophy, like with philosophy, and especially analytics hate undefined words. So as a continental, I'm a little bit more like lenient, and I'll let people use like more colloquial language, and we can kind of move on through it, but we do ask for definitions and make sure that we're on the right track. Analytics want you to define fucking everything you say before you say it.
I feel like I'm kind of guilty of that, because then when someone comes along and they try and use something and they want to come and, like, that, you know, that person who I sent to you, he wanted to say, oh, there was one word, I think it was good, it was something like that. Oh no, ethical. He wanted to redefine the term. He was
Right,
using
yeah.
it,
And
but
people
in
do
his
redefine words, yeah, like they do just fucking redefine shit all the
drive
time.
me, oh, just like, don't, what you doing? No. Like, it's like, well, it's like almost like, can we just create a different word for the purpose of this discussion? But yeah, I guess it's pedantic on my part, but it is frustrating because obviously there are connotations behind words, and when someone says it, you immediately think a certain thing, and yeah. But yeah, we could go on about that for hours. That would
Yeah, and I think the whole
um
point is as well is that, like, look, you can't let people like singularly define words. I think it's fucking bullshit. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, if
no.
they say like what I mean is this, then you can kind of talk past it. But when people like try to say like, look, you're using a word wrong, it's like, no, like, we'll have to talk about what is the shared common understanding of that word and what it actually pertains to. And I think that,
No.
like, the reality is that when we talk about something like in ethics, people just normally just use the word lapsadaisy, like use words lapsadaisically,
Hmm.
especially, and it happens on both sides, the realists and the moral anti-realists, and that's usually what
Hmm.
causes most of the fucking confusion. We just talk past each other.
It really does. And to be fair, that there are multiple definitions that are accepted within, you know, so
Which is why you
it,
need to do
it
your
is
best
a
to like just try and overcome it. And I think there's a guy called Habermas who talks about this, who says, is like, as long as you created what's called the what's it the well, I'll have to remember what it's called. It's like the things of communication. It's Habermas. Um,
well, while you're thinking of that,
theory of
the only
communicative action.
the
Um,
theory of community. Okay, yeah,
and he
sorry, go
basically
on.
says that, like, one of the most important things is like sincerity to one another, like the actual willingness to try and understand one another's position. And he says that, like,
Hmm.
we can't actually gain an understanding of reality and like what we're talking about between each other, in language, if we are willing to be sincere and actually explain things to one another, and as best as we can. And I think that's actually the case. I think that, like, in the reality, we can overcome, like the the language game that's going on, so long as we're willing to like put the time in and the effort.
Yeah, 100%. It's just sometimes if people are trying to redefine certain things, like say it's a word like ethical, you can derive connotations from what sort of person they are, which is difficult. You've got to kind of put that aside when you're
Yeah,
debating
yeah,
them, who they
exactly. Like,
are.
some people like just want like to say like something's ethical, and what they mean is that they approve of it, or that
Yeah.
like that's the way that they've been taught it. So it's either like a
Hmm.
socio-political bias or it's a personal like bias. But ultimately, when we use words like ethical, like in reality, we talk about like right and wrong behavior. So you have to show why it's right, and if something is right, then you have to be able to show that you would be like irrational if you were to do otherwise. It would be
Hmm.
irrational if you were to know that the right thing to do was to like wear a helmet when you ride your bike, and then you go out and you do not ride your bike, and ride your bike without a helmet rather, and that would be like
Hmm.
irrational. And you'd have to be able to show like that it is irrational, obviously, but that's essentially the kind of the foundation of like an objective ethics take, where you basically say there is a moral fact, in relation to our judgments, and if you judge to behave in such a way that ignores that fact, then you are being irrational.
Sorry to be pedantic, but so in this kind of like analogy, would you measure it against the risk though? So say for example, you're a really good, so in this, like, you're not wearing a helmet, you're riding a bike, but the weather conditions are good, it's dry, you're a really good cyclist, you've never fallen over. Is that still, would
Well,
you still deem that irrational just because the risk is present?
I mean, like, it depends. Like, obviously, we'd have to make an argument for like what risks are rational to take and not, in the first
Right.
place.
Hmm.
Is can an individual rationally risk their life? If they can, what can they risk it for? Um, why would risk be bad in the first place? These are the kind of
Hmm.
things that you'd have to talk about in reality. So if I was to say that, like, I was risking my life, to save a child from a hail of gunfire, I'd have to show that, that the risk itself was bad, and that like I was doing something that or like that would be negative or irrational, or negative in general. So like by risking my life, I'm doing something which could bring around a moral negative, like a negative connotation, or a negative outcome rather. And then from that point on, I'd have to show that that negative outcome is in reference to an action or an obligation from which if I didn't do it, there would also be a negative outcome, like the death of the child. And so the risk of my own safety relates to the value of my life. This is what I would argue. The risk of not acting creates either there's also a risk of not acting, which is the loss in the life of the child. The value of me and the child are one and the same. Do I have an obligation to the child more than I have an obligation to myself? Or in saving the child, will it produce a greater overall positive value? So it depends on whether you're deontologist or utilitarian, and how you understand those things.
I'm pretty sure I'm not utilitarian. I think I have a problem with utilitarianism.
Oh, really? Oh, that's nice.
I think
Everyone's
so.
usually utilitarian by default. It's like the dominant ethic.
Because Vosh talks, and he's a utilitarian, isn't he? And I just think that it's absent of personal responsibility. Is kind of my layman understanding. It just doesn't seem.
No, his utilitarianism is like, so for example, like Peter Singer is a utilitarian, and he's talking about how we should all be vegan.
Right.
So in reality, utilitarians think of personal responsibility usually to a degree that is unachievable. So like real utilitarians talk about that which is good to a standard which is like usually beyond the capability of human action. So they're like, yeah, well, we should all do this thing that is unbelievably hard to do, and we are obligated to do it. Otherwise, we're doing the wrong thing.
Right.
You're all biased towards yourself, and you're not acting rationally. That's more like a real utilitarian. Like real utilitarians are usually, like in terms of moral realists, painfully ethical. like the point when you're like, oh my fucking god, I've got to give up everything to charity, and to the point in which that's the point in which I'm obligated. And then Peter Singer will be like, yes, you need to give up every fucking thing to charity in order to overcome the problem of poverty. Just give up as much.
How is Earth is Vosh then still like categorized under the same?
Oh, Vosh is an idiot. He has no offense to the guy. Like, I mean, I guess a little bit offense to the guy, but I mean, Vosh is an idiot. He just like Vosh is like he doesn't like. Is it Vosh or Vosh? I don't know. Like Vosh.
Vosh.
He doesn't understand utilitarianism at all. So like, he's like, I'm a utilitarian. Ethics doesn't exist. It's like.
Yeah,
what?
Yeah, so it's him bastardizing it then, really.
Yeah, he doesn't.
Desecrating the good name of the utilitarian.
Yeah, utilitarians aren't really like. I take the piss out of them all the time because I'm a deontologist and it's just good fun. But I care about reasons, and I'm actually a mixture of consequentialist and deontology in terms of like the tradition that I'm part of. So I'm like a nice healthy mix, but.
A nice healthy mix, okay.
But the like consequentialists, like utilitarians, they judge what's good and bad by the, like, for example, the principle of utility, which is what utilitarianism's based on, is the greatest good for the greatest number, right? That's the principle of utility. Literally, the outcome which is the best for the greatest number of people is the best thing that could happen, and that is what we should do and what we should aim towards. That's utilitarianism.
Yeah, I think in like theory that is, but then when I start thinking of examples, I feel really bad, and I'm like, no, I don't. This doesn't feel right. I don't know.
I think it's because like what you need is a theory of like human action, in which case it's got to relate to like the subjectivity of the individual, and it's got to be abstract and knowable. And I think utilitarians assume a given end as well. So there's a lot of like reasons that I would say that utilitarianism fails. I'd say that they assume that which is good. In relation to some sort of abstract value. It's like, well, what is the greatest good for the greatest number? What does that look like? What I should do to achieve it is really comparative to me movement into politics. And so like when I talk about what is good that I should do, it's also in reference to what we should do. And that's where you get threshold deontology, which is like W.D. Ross, the right and the good. You know, like it's better to save your mom's life than save a stranger's life, because if everyone saves their mom's life, then we ultimately produce a better outcome anyway. And
So
Henry
you're
said,
telling me I could have a justification for saving a loved one? That's brilliant.
well, that's the thing. I think it's rational. I think it's absolutely rational.
Yeah.
And people don't people don't see this as like what it is. What they think is like, look, people just want to save their own. And it's like not necessarily. Like if like the argument would still stand, like if you fucking hate the person that you're supposed to save. So if you, let's say you fall out with your parents, and let's say you've been like let's say you fell out with your parents. It's like they're horrible people overall, but they've not been abusive or something like that, which would maybe negate like the overall good that could be produced. Like you just don't get on with them or whatever. And then, you know, it comes to the point in which you've got to choose between, you know, your friend's mom and your mom. A deontologist to be like, your mom, I don't care what you feel about them. And that's because the reality of the situation is being judged against a metric which is separate from your feelings, which is why it's like, I don't care about your feelings, man. Which is why Peter Singer and stuff would go like, the reality of the situation is, if your feelings are telling you that it's okay to kill animals, change your feelings.
Right. Okay. By the way, people, he was saying mum when he was saying mum. Again, it's the English problem. It's
Mom.
just
The word
amazing.
is mom. That is the word.
Right, I've got a few more questions for you that I just can't stand.
Just to quickly,
this
just to answer the super
bastardization of the English
chats.
language over again.
Just to quickly answer some super chats, because like somebody asked
Of
us, what
course.
if your play opponent were to say that ethics, this is JS by the way, and thank you for the donation, say that their ethics were pointed in favor of progress through competition, or some alternative to the good for sentient beings. I'd just say like, I'd ask them to instantiate why it's good. I'd say like, why is it that is actually valuable, and prove to me that it is not deriving an ought from an is. Like as in like show that it's not asserted and that it must be the case. So I'd ask them for that moral theory. And then I'd see if I could be skeptical of it. Donald Anderson said, if we grant that knowledge is predicated on language, how can we explain that animals have archaic knowledge about the world to ensure that their survival, though they're pre-linguistic? Knowledge about predators, edible food, etc. I don't believe that they have knowledge. They could have instinctual processes that move them towards a certain action. They could have, certain concepts. Which
Is that what they mean by archaic language? Sorry.
Archaic knowledge. So like it would be like
knowledge, yeah.
like inbuilt knowledge.
Sorry.
So like for example, how can a bird that's just been born, like a baby goose, tell on the clouds the difference between a silhouette of a hawk and a goose, which it can, from the point of birth? I would say that that's not knowledge. Knowledge is true justified belief, in which case I'd say that there is no reason to believe for the baby that it will always be the case. So the baby could be born with a intrinsic instinct which ultimately did not give information correctly about reality. But thank you for your question, Donald Anderson. Politics in its place.
You know so much about geese.
I watched QI like years ago. I just remember everything I hear pretty much, if I'm honest. So like half the time, like I don't even know where the fuck like things that I know about things, man.
Yeah.
Like politics in its place said ethics is about behavior according to you, but you don't study behavior. This is why a lot of what you are saying seems like a word salad. It's not that people are reading ethics, it's not that people are not reading about philosophy or ethics. Have me on later to discuss. We'll see about that politics in its place. I suggest if you want to come on, you start off by not saying I'm talking in a word salad, although I probably am. But like, I do study behavior in some respects in terms of ethics, like in terms of what behaviors are good and bad. If you're saying like the study of behavior in terms of psychology, I mean, I do psychoanalytics, but like, look, like psychology doesn't tell us any law-like constructions about behavior anyway, because it's not a science. And I can make that argument philosophically, because ultimately the foundations of all sciences and is, you know, in terms of knowledge claims, is epistemics, which is philosophy, which is why you get a PhD at the end of, you know, all of these fields. You get what's called a doctor of philosophy. And so
will you accept it's a soft science?
no, no,
No, okay.
it's not a soft science. It's
Do
not
you
a
have a problem
science.
that is?
It's it depends on what you mean by soft science. If you mean by soft science that it's not a science, then yes.
No, because when I was studying sociology, this was the problem with the doctors. They were quite upset about it not being a science, and they were saying, well, it is, because you've got your data you can compile to measure behaviors and theories, and so I guess soft.
I think I guess the issue
Soft.
my argument would be that the metaphysics of the fields is separate. So like for something to be a science, it has to be able to describe and explain the phenomena that exists in the world to a degree that can predict change, and also explain that which has already occurred, create law-like
Could you
constructions and generalizations and stuff. I would
say
say,
it? So sorry, I just say a term in sociology like broken windows theory. Would you
right.
not argue that would demonstrate a behavior and a thing that happens, and it will tell you about the future? Like I'm sure you've heard of the broken windows theory or something
I
like
would
that.
say that like most of the time, what it is a description of what normally happens, and so doesn't actually prove it. Like it doesn't actually prove a predictive theory of behavior that must always occur. Like so, for example, the the ideal gas laws in physics. The ideal gas laws in physics basically argue that this is the state of this gas under ideal conditions. It must always be like this.
Yeah.
And now, with sociology or psychology, what they do is they look at the data and they create a graph which shows a correlation, but they don't provide any causal explanation which underpins and argues for that. It might very well be the case that everyone in our culture typically, would associate, like, I'm trying to remember this, like the broken windows theory. It basically argues that, like, from what I'm understanding, it basically argues that there are certain environments that impact the levels of crime within an area. Like, a certain environment can impact, like, the criminal activity. Now, that's fair enough, but it doesn't explain why it is impacting it, or whether it's, like, socio-political in origin, whether it's to do with a certain human behavior, whether it's likely to change or not. So, for example, you could have an uprising of a different ideology within society if none of this is a science relating to a human, like, natural behavior, and say, like, look, everyone in society starts understanding that an area that is morally, like, let's say everyone becomes like a tanky revolutionary socialist, right? That becomes the norm. And so people stop breaking poor downtrodden areas, and they start now going after rich upper class areas. So crime rates now disproportionately occur in higher class areas. Now, that theory would then break down, and the reality is that every single theory, and this is from what I've experienced in, like, almost every single theory in psychology, has a counter theory which is usually as plausible. And there's no evidence to differentiate between which theory is true or not. And unless you can point towards why it must be the case, like provide sufficient reason or necessitated reason, it's not a science. You can't create, like, it's an assumption based upon a correlation of data, which is methodologically great and used in terms of, like in economics, for example, we talk about predictive patterns within the market, but then we'll get, like, obviously Adam Smith come out and go, look, none of this actually explains how the market's working, why it's going up and down, and so the market might just very well just bang drop out of nowhere or grow out of nowhere, dependent upon things that occur within reality. And so when we try to create, like, economic theories, they always fuck up, and they never explain why we never ever actually predict, like, the growth or recession of the economy, like, perfectly. They only rely upon prior data and what they think may occur. They can't explain certain subsets of phenomena which, disrupt the theory, the way that, like, ideal gas laws or or like other physical theories can say, like, this law applies universally except under these conditions. They don't even have, like, these, like, kind of principle difference, like, what's the word I'm looking for, detailed like exceptions. So that no, there is like no way to show that like a social science is true unless you can make a predictable theory of human behavior and relate it to why humans must or should always act in a given way.
I guess if I was to take your position, I mean, yeah, the theory itself that you have, like broken window theory, doesn't explain it. Is like then the perspectives that come in, and they see, you know, from the example of a postmodernist or a functionalist, then they explain why that's the case. And then you could have something like, say, the self-fulfilling prophecy, for example,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you're familiar with. When they saw the effect of self-fulfilling prophecy and they segmented it down to different groups, they found that actually the self-fulfilling prophecy was applicable to young black boys, but it wasn't applicable to young black girls. And it did the opposite.
Yeah, well,
So I guess
yeah, like
that proves.
that's it.
Mhm.
Like, and as well, like, even like some like politics in his place. See in chat saying, I think psychology to PP is psychoanalysis. No, that's wrong. I actually like psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is valuable because it gives the possibility of treating the individual by showing them the choices that they are making in relation to in relation to how they approach, for example, something like the self-fulfilling prophecy. If you were to say someone's like self-defeating and going like, look, I'm taking this working class hero mentality and I'm never going to actually achieve anything in life, and this is all like my life's going downhill because of me social class. And then you go like, wait a minute, why do you think that? And you show them that situation and like, look, the outcomes that you've actually are experiencing in life are because of this fundamental choice that you're making prior in your psyche. Then you're actually giving the people possibility of actually challenging the confliction in drives, which is causing them the psychological like the issues. Psychology would relate it to like brain states, something like or behavior, in order to show that it's a lot of the time in order to create like a material grounding. And so psychology would have to show that materialism is true in order to accurately predict a causal theory of human behavior. And that's actually what I'm criticizing here, politics in its place. I'm not saying psychology and psychoanalysis are the same. I'm saying psychoanalysis is actually far more valuable than most psychology because psychoanalysis is hermeneutic in nature, while psychology is top-down or and fails to provide a sufficient grounding for a causal theory of human behavior. So yeah, like anyway, that's that. Sorry about the little like rant there. Urethral, your boy says on Urethral. The issue with the third horn of the dilemma is this: are good-making traits good because they are part of God's nature, or is God's nature good because it has good-making traits? Well, I think that the response to that would probably be that good is irreducible to be itself, and you could either take the Platonic response and say like to be itself it must always be good, and so is simple and a non-composite, in which case it's not a good-making trait. A trait is good because it partakes in goodness, the universal. Or you could say that goodness is hylomorphic, and in which case the traits are only good together in combination with one another because they represent an expression of that which makes it good. It is only good when it includes those traits. It's like the same thing with like you could say like the same thing with I think like a human is like for Aristotle in hylomorphic, the combination of the material and the form. A chair, for example, is the combination of the material and the form. It's not that it's simply made of wood, that it's that it's got four legs and so on like that. It's that it has the purpose to be sat on. It has the like the function to be sat on, and it also has the essence that it contains. It's that which is like to like what would it be? It'd be like to have four sides and all of these different characteristics. So it's like what's called hylomorphic, a combination of certain traits which produce an irreducible entity. And it's basically Aristotle's critique of Plato. But yeah, that's the donation. Sorry, I was just I hope that answers the questions. Thank you guys for donating. So you wanted to ask some more questions.
Yes, and then I will leave you. I haven't eaten yet today.
Oh God, man! Oh God, eat.
I'm like so
objectively
hungry.
bad.
So yeah, that is an objective. But no. So PP talks about PP.
Every time.
Big PP talks about
Big
the need for
PP.
language in order to establish morality. So morality can not only be set. We've already done that one. Sorry. Sorry, and I've got I've got another one. Sorry about that. If morality is developed as over time, as we learn through reciprocal conversation, do we take the position that somebody in their time is behaving ethically when we know better?
So, like Christians 1,000 years ago was having slaves. I wouldn't
Yes.
condemn Christians 1,000 years ago for having slaves. I don't think that you
No,
can.
me neither.
Yeah, I don't think that
No,
like
because
they wouldn't have known better.
you can't desecrate people based upon information that they don't possess, right? So, like, surely.
Yeah, exactly. Like in terms of ethics, it's about their behavior, and if they don't have the knowledge to behave differently, then they can't be condemned for having that lack of knowledge. It's like ignorance. It's like they can be wrong, but not know that they are wrong. Like Newtonian physics, it was people were right in believing in Newtonian physics a couple of 100 years ago. That doesn't make Newtonian physics right.
Exactly. Okay. And then the continuation of that was, or is it ultimate fully objective morality becoming apparent as we now move forward? So yeah, we're just coming to, so in your idea, we're kind of coming towards this objective morality and understanding of right and wrong. Is that kind of like how you see it?
Sorry, say that again.
So for you, do you just kind of see us on this kind of path towards understanding
Yeah,
the ultimate?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's actually what Hegel titles like the absolute spirit. In terms of,
Oh,
so it's like in
you
terms
love
of,
that man.
so yeah, like it's moving towards an end goal, and that end goal is like that which is absolutely ethical.
Okay. I will read Hegel because he gives you big pee, and I too would like big pee.
Yeah, exactly. Hegel does give everyone big PP. He's very great. Honestly, though, absolute bastard to read. I'd recommend a reader's guide. I'd say like, if you want to understand Hegel, I'd recommend like two books just straight off the bat. Is for his ethics, I'd say David Rowe's The Phenomenology of David Rowe's A Reader's Guide to the Philosophy of Right, rather.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say Peter Singer, um, a short introduction to Hegel is probably the most accessible to most people. It's like really easy. It's just a really small book. So
Okay.
and
He's saying book again. He's saying it weird.
book,
Don't worry.
I book.
Nobody panic.
I don't know, and just politics in its place, right? Like, if you want to debate us on whether psychology is a science, you're welcome to come on and debate us at some point. Like, if you want to say that like psychology is a science, and you can make an argument that psychology is a science, that's not just going to appeal to a methodology, and you can argue for like in relation to the philosophy of science that it is a science. You're welcome to come on, and we can discuss it.
I have a final question. It's just someone wanted to ask in a quick outreach chat. We have 3 minutes to plant a big enough seed to make an impact. So regarding animal rights, what's PP's advice? You got 3 minutes. What are you going to tell them?
So they've got three minutes to do what?
You've got 3 minutes in an outreach conversation to talk to someone about animal rights. What would you say? We just absolutely go for.
Okay, well, I mean, like, I guess it depends on the person who you're talking to, doesn't it? Like this is the thing. Like, I don't think that you can just go like, all right, well, objective ethics and like just word salad their head off. It depends on where that person's at. Like, if I'm talking to a Christian, then I'm going to approach them like through their worldview. If I'm talking to like a Muslim, I'm going to talk to them through their worldview. I'm going to explain like, well, did you know that like meat, that like they're like all vegetables are halal. But animal products are haram. Do you really think that God would approve of the killing of animals unnecessarily? And then we could get into a discussion of why God would approve that, and then explain maybe like fundamentalism and stuff like that. Difficult with fundamentalists. Same with Christians, it's difficult with them. But if they're more enlightened and they're more willing to question like the foundations of their beliefs, then you could talk about like whether God would put animals on the earth, to kill and so on. If it's someone that's like a scientist, you can talk to them like in relation to the experiences of value within that animal, and like why they think that a lot of the time scientists like to just think that like everything that's not science is devoid of meaning, and so you could take them down that route. Or maybe someone's just anthropocentric and wants to say that like the only thing that matters is humans, right? Like why it's about intelligence or something, like, and then you can show them like, look, like why do you think intelligence matters? What about like disabled children and go marginal cases? It really depends upon the individual. So I'd always recommend relating it back to the worldview of the individual.
Have you heard of the elephant and the rider as a theory?
I
Where
haven't.
you, I forgot who said it, but it's this idea that you have logic and emotion, and they used very
Yeah.
non-vegan
Oh yeah.
friendly.
Oh yeah. I think the thing is like what is it like? It's to say that like ultimately people are not motivated by reasons, but motivated by
No,
emotion.
yeah,
Um,
and they preemptively will believe that the logic is driving them when really the emotion's fully in control.
See, I
So you
think I think
appeal.
a lot of the time, like you can have that, like people can have that psychological effect, but there's nothing that hurts me more than seeing the really bad psychological experiments that try to show that people are motivated purely by emotion, and a lot of the time the experiments are actually trash. Um, like,
Okay,
uh,
I've got an
uh,
example.
it was one that was posted in my Discord recently, and it was about people's understanding of like firemen and stuff like that. I can't remember what the name of the experiment was, and it was basically shown that people were motivated by I can't like break down the experiment adequately, but the like without having to bring up the actual experiment. So I'm going to paraphrase a lot of shit here.
Hmm.
Essentially, the experiment showed that an individual who was told what a good fireman was, um, um, like told that a fireman was good, would make the decision that a fireman was good. Like so, for example, this guy's a great fireman. He's been awarded for being like really careful and and safe. And then you could take the same fireman and go, this is a really bad fireman. This fireman's been punished for being um for being too careful and unwilling to take risks. And the group that's told that he's too careful, like they both are then made aware that this is actually an experiment. That in which cases, every time that they've described a good fireman as, both sides have went, a good fireman is careful, or a good fireman is like willing to take risks. And then when get told it's an experiment, they get asked like, look, what do you think a good fireman is now? Now that you know that it's an experiment, and a lot of the time they'll confirm the same bias that they had anyway. And so the point of that experiment, I think, did very little to prove why people take certain positions in relation to the reasons for why I think a fireman was good and bad in the first place in general. What it shows is that maybe an individual one didn't even engage with the topic, and it doesn't necessarily show that people aren't motivated by reasons, but that people can be motivated without reasons, without having thought about them, or that people may only be motivated by those reasons from which they are given and unwilling to engage rationally in the subject area. So for example, if you were to put a group of philosophers in the same scenario and ask them the question, well, what is a good fireman? They might start arguing about what good is before they even get into talking about whether he's a good fireman. But ultimately, they're going to have enough doubt to rationally deduce certain criteria from which is the role of a fireman. They might start talking about like what is the function of a fireman and so on. But because it's in terms of like and then they may be more motivated to stick by a rational deduction. The issue is that associating it with the average everyday person, who is, I would argue, not too rational in terms of their upbringing, makes usually broad claims about humanity and like human nature, that people aren't motivated to change their mind on reasons, when in reality you've taken a sample of individuals in the same socio-political environment, which is what, hedonistically capitalist, which has crushed reasoning for the last, I don't know, like 1,000 years. Like prior, like 1,000 years ago, language was so esoteric that they were deliberately making it impossible to read if you were a member of the underclass, so the lower classes. So in reality, linguistic reasoning's only been around for so long. Hierarchy's been
Hmm.
around for a lot longer. Yet we'll say that the reason in which an individual will engage in hierarchy rather than understand their own reasons, accept their own reasons, has more to do with a human nature rather than a socio-political event. And I think that in reality, that's begging the question.
Yeah, I mean, you see that linguistic limitation, like even when I was studying linguistics, when it came to animals, the complexity of their communication and the idea that they could even have language was just laughed at. which is just ridiculous when you actually understand the difference between communication and language. And I will fight people to the death over it.
I think there is a
So, yeah.
massive difference between communication and language. You can communicate I think language holds ideas constant, when you could have communication which is pre-linguistic. And I think I would argue that even language requires a level of pre-linguistic communication to even develop. Yeah.
And it's when they define in linguistics, when they're defining the distinction between language and communication, they're saying, well, communication is like it's there and then you're looking at language, and it's you can maintain these things up in the air basically and bring them back. But then when they did things like crow studies and could see, there's the hat study where they were looking at if crows could if they could tell their mates who hadn't ever seen a hat that hat was bad and dangerous, because a man wearing a hat would like try and hurt them. And that they told their entire they managed to communicate to the others that oh no, this person with a hat, this is a demonstration of something that's dangerous to us. And I would argue that surpasses communication.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that's communication. I would even say, like, if we standardize the signification there and held it between individuals, then it becomes a language. And I'd say that's the movement from language to communication, from language. Yeah.
And I just, as soon as I can't even get into that subject, because as soon as like linguistic comes up and then they start like dunking on animals, I'm just like, I'm gone. I can't.
I imagine. Like, I'm not. I wouldn't call myself an expert in anywhere near an expert, or even probably competent in in linguistics. I keep meaning to do more in it. Like, it's such a great. I actually fucking love linguistics. It's actually such.
Linguistics is brilliant. Yeah. It's brilliant. It really is. And I think it would be beneficial to you as a philosophy. Like all of these things, we have this issue of like what's what and what can tell you what, but they all bleed into each other. So having this understanding would just be really good. But
yeah. And just to thinking politics in these places, like I completely agree. People live in the real world and they don't have time necessarily to rationalize everything they're doing. But then you can have people who are engaged in rational, so like you can have what's called second nature and like conditioning oneself, like in terms of like reactions and stuff, so that you can like change one's habits. And what is it in the words of Aristotle? Habit is but it's actually a poem, ancient Greek poem. Habit is but a long action friend, which becomes our nature in the end. And I think that the reality is that if you're a fireman in the real world, you can be conditioned to behave appropriately to a rational decision-making process, which has been trained into you, which is the purpose of training in the first place. So when you're saying that like people are engaged in some sort of like emotional bias and they'll act purely on emotional stimuli, well, I would say that one, people can condition their emotions in relation to like rational engagements, make themselves like more brave, more or less foolhardy and so on. But they can also manipulate the scenario in which they can behave rationally on a whim. So yeah, sorry, I just had to get that through.
You had to get that out there. That's fine. No, but no, I think this is good. I will definitely. I've got loads of notes written down, and I will try and understand. It's just obviously there's quite a clear indication that I have a lot to understand that is limiting my ability to comprehend all these different ideas. But I will do that, and it would be good. There were some things in this. I'll have to watch it back again, but there were some things in this that I thought, oh, that would be a really good thing for us to discuss in another stream. So if you would like to use me again as your kind of like, I don't know what I would be referred to as here, but the layman.
Yeah, man.
That'd be really cool, for sure. I would like that. I've learned stuff. It just takes a while, obviously, to get in. I'll have my sleep and have my food, and suddenly I'll be a genius like you, PP.
Well, really you need to have sleep and food, man. It's so important, like genuinely. And thanks for coming on. Like, I really appreciate it. Like, I think it's been a genuinely fun conversation. I don't know if I've done a good job, like expressing, like, obviously the information to you.
No, I think you have. I think it's this kind of balance. It's difficult to communicate knowledge on something of which you already have to someone who doesn't. And as well as that, when you're dealing with something so complicated that does require understanding everything else, it's hard to not bring them in. Like, but there were some words like, luckily, that I knew, like prescriptively, descriptively, axiomatic. I do know these, so it made it
a little bit easier. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I think like there's nothing worse than if you don't have any not like honestly, I think that they should teach it in schools, like philosophy, at least a little bit in schools. Like I think it's a bit
There
sad that they
wasn't.
don't.
Mm,
Like obviously your
ethics
knowledge of it, like
should be.
you probably got from ethics debates online and stuff, and like engaging in the field,
Hmm.
like even in terms of like doing sociology and psychology, there'll be some like language like
Yeah.
crossovers and stuff. But it's sad that like a lot of the
Hmm.
time it's just usually people just assuming like what's like philosophy is, and people think that we're just like talking about things where there's no answers, and it's awful.
Yeah. It really does, because I think I fell into it because of who I am. I pride myself on being good, so I want to know what good is. But some people just, they're going about life just doing, and trying to like egoists, and trying to fulfill their own desires, and
Yeah.
it's just like, well, we need to be taught where that good is coming from, definitely. Otherwise, I think that would lead to a better
A better outcome.
outcome.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think even if
Yeah.
you're gonna be a skeptic, at least know how to be a skeptic, like in a productive way, like what to be skeptical about, when to be skeptical, and and ultimately how it can help and aid a conversation in terms of a dialectic and discourse. Like know how to
Hmm.
create an antithesis, not just like reject reality itself. So yeah,
Yeah.
but I
uh,
thanks again,
Thank
thanks
you so
again for
much.
coming on, and I really appreciate it. And obviously,
You're
if
so
anyone
welcome.
wants to subscribe and see some
Oh,
more
do it.
vegan gays,
Do
subscribe to
it.
Vegan Gays.
Do
So
it.
our links in the description. So yeah, thanks for coming on.
we're
I really
we're
appreciate.
we're we're pro PP. It might not seem that way, but we are pro PP on my stream.
Yeah, pro PP.
Everything about me suggests otherwise,
I
but
was
I
gonna
am
say
pro
that
PP.
being a lesbian is like usually the one thing that would normally lead people to think you're probably not pro PP, but like in this case, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me.
Yeah,
That's
that's
just
it.
the
That's
case.
it. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much, and congrats on the subscribers. Everybody share PP,
Oh,
to
thanks,
the
man.
knowledge of PP. All right,
Thanks. I
I
really
love you
appreciate it.
so much. Mwah, mwah. Goodbye.
Goodbye. See you later.
Bye.
Right. Right. Everyone. Cool. Right. Probably just do a Q&A now, guys. I'm actually debating a fascist tomorrow, so that should be interesting. So if anyone has any questions, just drop them in a chat. If you want your question, PP roast, man. No, please. I'm already frustrated about the psychology thing. I get it. I know that people don't like me psychology takes. I'm just saying that metaphysically, I don't think psychology is. It doesn't mean psychology is not valuable. Philosophically, psychology is so valuable. Like I appreciate the methodology. Even I just think that when you look at how to treat people, treating it like a science and creating a causal understanding of human nature, ultimately leads to worse conclusions than otherwise would be the case. And someone brought up CBT. CBT is actually not that bad. In terms of like how it functions, though, a lot of the time CBT usually is getting someone to reflect on their behaviors in relation to their ideas, and that's not so bad. But then that's like one a useful yet very like I would say like very unrelated form of psychology from my explanation. And I will say politics needs place. You're probably right about this. I don't know that much about this aspect of psychology, which is like necessarily every field in psychology, right? Like in terms of psychology itself, I'm not an expert, but I can talk about the metaphysics of psychology. But CBT, from what I've seen and how I understand it, is valuable in the terms of therapy. I think therapy itself is valuable. I think that the main things I reject in psychology are things like behaviorism, material explanations of human behavior, and like reductionism in terms of an explanation of the mind. So, yeah, I hope that explains really why obviously that's why psychology is bad. No, it's not bad, but it's like not science. And thanks very much for coming on, Vegan Gays. It's really appreciated. Can I hop in and talk about why I don't want to call myself a vegan? Absolutely. Question mark. Have at they? I've been meaning to talk to you for a while, so come on. PP, what's your opinion on Stephen Holgate's intros to Hegel's logic? I keep getting told to read that. I actually haven't read Holgate's intro to Hegel's logic. I think I'm trying to think how I actually got introduced to Hegel's logic, and I don't think it was Hellgate. I don't think it was Hellgate. I'll have to remember what guide I read for that, because I read a book introducing us to Hegel's logic, and then I read, but then a lot of it actually comes from reading Hegel's logic. Why am I vegan? Because it's wrong to harm sentient beings unnecessary, to cause unnecessary harm to sentient beings. So yeah. When you purchase animal products, you produce the suffering and death of other sentient beings, which is irrational, right? Ultimately, we're trying to maximize value here. Who is the fascist tomorrow? Most are painfully undereducated. Both Keith Woods, a YouTuber, is at least familiar with authors as you with the authors you are. GS, I have no idea who the fascist I'm debating tomorrow is. Like, there are some random person on Discord. So, yeah. Yeah, should be interesting in any ways. I've like totally lost where the chat was. Maybe politics in its place. If you can give me a solid metaphysical argument for why psychology is a science, I would love to see that. Do you see engaging with engaging with fascists as platforming fascists? Well, one, I'm quite a small platform, like not huge at the minute anyway, so it's not like I'm giving them a massive area of reach. And I'm pretty confident I can show why everything they're saying is wrong. So I'm giving them an opportunity to debate me and enter a format where I can take their arguments apart. And I think there's nothing more dangerous than banning a certain political discourse and allowing it to form a seedy underbelly from which we cannot criticize it. Platforming fascists may seem dangerous in the sense that it allows people to communicate and express certain ideological positions, which ultimately, may prevent like freedom of speech, which would be an issue. But by not platforming them, it can become a ideological underbelly of society, progress through the minds of individuals without having ever been questioned, and ultimately seed itself before we can actually take action against it. So yeah. Speaking of which, actually, can I break down the Calum debate between rationality rules and capturing Christianity? I should be having rationality rules and Cosmic Skeptic on the channel very soon. I think they agreed that like Alex agreed to debate us on Trinitarianism, and then I don't know, we're hoping to do a round table, I think, between me, Alex, and Rationality Rules, but Alex has exams coming up in a month, so he may have to literally like put off all YouTube engagements. Just remember that answer. Right. Better than the MCU is the PP universe. Absolutely. I hope you're all having a nice stream right now, and hopefully we're gonna have some nice time. Darth Dawkins is debating on modern day debates there. Ugh, God, I talked to Darth Dawkins once, and it was absolute hell. I'm just waiting for Mark, if he's around. Ah, here we go. There he is. Do I just message you here? Yes, you do, Mark. Hello, Mark. How are you doing? Mark? Mark? Is it not working? Is there a reason why this isn't working? Hello? The light isn't actually going around your photo or anything. Tell you what, just join me server. Right, just 1 second. This is Mark sorting this out, so should only be a minute or two. Ah, right, using the browser. But PP, your beliefs are not based on empiricism. No. So why would it matter? Are we more clear? That's first. Yeah, I'm not an empiricist. Yeah. But we need like empiricism doesn't mean that we'll like. So for example, I believe in grounding, and in terms of like explaining, like so for example, explaining causal. So to have a causal explanation of something, you need to provide sufficient reason. Now, if I'm an objective idealist, I'm going to argue that reality is fundamentally constituted of mind, and so to propose a causal explanation of mind requires you to go prior to existence, which is fundamentally impossible. Which is why I would take the Sartrean position of there can be a law, there can be we can be conscious. What does he say again? There can be no law. There is no such thing as a law of consciousness. We can be conscious of laws. No, that's it. We can be conscious of laws. Right, I've just remembered the full fucking quote. Right, okay. A law is a transcendental object. We can be conscious of laws. No, that's it. Oh my fucking god! I'm never going to be able to say this. Right, we're going to start this all again. Everyone, right? Hiya, Mark. I need to say this quote. Okay. Right. Okay. A law is a transcendental object. We can be conscious of a law. There can be consciousness of a law, not a law of consciousness. Fucking hell. There we go. How you doing, mate? I definitely heard you for a second. Mark?
I hear you on the stream, but I can't hear you on Discord.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me? Can you not hear us at all? Have you checked your settings? To wait for the delay of the ping now to catch up and inform them of what I've just said.
Let me try and DM you again.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so I can hear you on the stream just fine, but with Discord, I can't hear you.
Right. I think it might be. I don't know if it was a connection
or what.
Have you checked your your output, like your device output in your voice settings. Yeah, absolute idealism, James K. Absolutely. Separation between like objective and subjective idealism is basically absolute idealism versus Schopenhauer, Kant. Between Hegel and Schopenhauer and Kant, I should say, sorry. Mark.
Could you say something again?
Hello? Mark?
Okay, I can hear you just fine now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Oh shit. Okay, that's great. Okay, that's great. So how you doing, man? So tell us, why don't you want to be
Alright,
called a vegan anymore?
So that's embarrassing. It actually was my settings.
Oh, it happens. It happens all the time. Don't worry
Because
about
like I could hear you on YouTube just fine, so I thought the output is fine. But yeah, I went into Discord, changed the output, and it's okay
it.
now.
Yeah, it happens to me all the time. Absolutely. Absolutely. Continue anyway.
So yeah, I've gone through this multiple times. I've been vegan for 7 years and animal rights activist and all that jazz. There's this guy Josh or John who is a few weeks ago or a month ago was talking about this, that he didn't feel like the definition was appropriate, and I saw a couple of conversations going back and forth about how why you should call yourself a vegan. And eventually he changed his position, but I actually don't understand
Right. Okay.
of using it. And it's just simple that it doesn't include sentience on the Vegan Society's website in the official definition. So if it doesn't include sentience, why that's just not right.
Well, I think that it's implicit when he says like animals, for animals, humans, and the environment. And I think that like all the literature that talks about it, it's the conceptual beginning and end of vegetarianism, and the talk about like the emancipation of animals and the consideration of animals as ethical creatures. I think that they probably should relate it to sentience more as a sentientism position. You could say that, but I think vegan ultimately, like when people talk about being vegan, it's about the consideration of animals, and it has been like that since the dawn of veganism. Like even like what's he called? The founder of the Vegan Society. What's he called again? Shit. I can't think of his name.
I forgot to.
I can't think of the name off the top of my head. It's not Leslie. It's not the Leslie guy. It's shit. I can't remember. But he wrote what was called the Emancipation of Animals, which was one of the first publications of the Vegan Society, and it's really nice. And he basically talks about like what it's about. Like the whole point of veganism is about the consideration of other animals and not just humans. And I think that knowing that, like in the consideration of like their experiences, knowing that like people talk about veganism in that way, I don't think that you necessarily have to say sentientism to know that it's a sentientist position.
So maybe in philosophy circles we'll include sentience. That's just part of the. It's obvious, but if you look at the general public, I don't think they're taking into consideration sentience. I don't think. I don't think conversations about that when it comes to say oysters or something like that. I've seen multiple vegan websites that are like, if you are okay with the consumption or the farming of oysters, you are not vegan.
But the vegan
And
websites, for one, are trash. Most there's like I'll link good ones when they're there, but most of the vegan websites are fucking trash. Made usually, I would argue, by non-vegans, because they don't know a fucking thing about any of it. They're like, oh, some vegans don't eat honey, or like some vegans think that it's wrong to buy leather, and it's like, what the fuck's going on at this point? Like, do you even understand the ethic behind it at all? And like they're just absolutely shit. So yeah, like I know what you're saying, because it like there is like that issue, like in terms of like, well, like where's the boundaries, like, and how do we understand it? And you get like, but most vegans like understand it to be in relation to animal suffering, I think almost exclusively. And like the vegans, what's the Vegan Society definition again? It's like A philosophy
Read it
and a
off,
way
right?
of a philosophy and a way of living which seeks to exclude as far as possible and practicable all forms of exploitation. And was cruelty to and exploitation of animals for food, um,
Clothing or any other
and any
purpose,
other
and by
purpose.
extension, promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of animals, humans, and the environment. In dietary terms, it denotes the practice of dispensing with all products derived wholly or partly from animals. Overall is good if they just included the sentience part.
Yeah, I think so too. But I think ultimately it's kind of like splitting hairs because almost all animals are sentient. It's very few animals that aren't, like that we would consider possibly not sentient. And then I don't think it's a good idea to eat them anyway in terms of the moral hazard of so like with oysters. I think was it one. I don't think we're necessarily sure they're not sentient, and then two, the way in which we would obtain oysters is usually poses a moral hazard towards other sentient beings anyway. So I'm not that bothered anyway. Like, you know what I mean?
I guess it's because I'm around philosophers, so it
I,
does
I
sort of.
want I want the truth. God damn it. So you call yourself a sentientist then?
I'm I don't know what to call myself right now. I'm using anti-speciesist. But so when I talked to David Benatar and we said, like, does this imply veganism? He's like, well, the problem isn't eating them. It's about killing them. And I totally agree with that. But see, like this type of splitting hairs is what philosophers will do, and then I get trapped in it because then I sound, like I don't know what I'm talking about. Which is true. Like it's not the problem isn't eating them; it's about killing them and paying by extension someone else to kill them, right?
But then I
And is
think
that justified?
I think the thick moral concepts in the definition help put that forward because it's cruelty to and exploitation of, and you can't, like, even if you were to say that you can't be cruel to an oyster because it's not sentient. Do you know what I mean? So you could argue it that way around.
So, like, if I reject, okay, if the vegan societies has these quote unquote official definition that everyone refers to, right? And I don't agree with the nuance and that splitting hairs part of the sentient part. Like, should I even be using that term?
I think
Should I
vegan's
just
fine.
use?
No, I think it's fine because I think it is the
Well,
beginning and end of the concept of vegetarianism. It's the whole point of vegetarianism and the whole point of veganism was to remove cruelty and exploitation towards other sentient beings. Really, I think when we're talking about whether the definition is good or not, what we're saying is like, has the society defined it as to capture the ethic that is enclosed within the vegan movement?
okay. Well, how do you rectify the issue of like just being part of a community that will say, well, you know, non-sentient animals obviously are not, if you consume them or whatever, you're not vegan. And
I don't think
I'd
most
say
people
about
do
like
that. Like,
80% of the vegan movement wouldn't accept this.
I think that
At
most
least,
people have probably aimed towards moral hazard. Like, I think most people like think that like the collecting oysters is ultimately like a worrisome thing. But if you were to show that oysters didn't feel pain or pleasure, which I think this is difficult, you know what I mean? Like, obviously it's kind of like that moral gray area for the sense that like it's more of like we'll lack information rather than like substantive proof that they're not sentient. And I'd say that like like the I'd say that ultimately I would say that ultimately we need to be I would say that we need to be careful anyway, and I'd say that the production of these products is usually like damning. I think that ultimately if we could show that they're not sentient, that there was no cruelty or exploitation, then it falls within the definition then that it wouldn't need to be avoided. Do you know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah, I think we agree on at least like the ethics behind this. But I guess what I'm asking is the social context of being part of a community, a group, or a movement where you disagree with the definition, um, or that, like, if I go to the local animal rights group or I go to the local vegan group and I say, well, personally, I don't eat oysters. I think they're gross, but I wouldn't have an ethical issue with it. And if I said that, I wouldn't be part of that in group anymore. And I, like, how would you navigate that?
I would probably just ask them like, well, what's the issue? Like, why wouldn't it be? I would just say like, I would just try and show that it's like, I would probably argue like within I wouldn't leave being vegan. I would try and argue within the confines of the tradition, and make an internal critique. And I would say that that is essentially what we must do to prevent dogmatism anyway. In the words of like Alistair McIntyre. So I would, rather than like leaving and calling myself something else, I would continue to call myself vegan and then say, yeah, but eating oysters is vegan if I believe that. Um, and then that would be, I think, the way to prevent dogmatism within the movement.
This debate's been going on for a while. Like, I don't think I would contribute anything new to the conversation.
But you will to those people. Like, so the debate's been going on between who? Do you know what I mean? Not necessarily like those individuals who are condemning it, because they mightn't even know anything about oysters anyway. So like, they might just think, why would you eat an animal? That's sick. You're wrong. Like, what the fuck? That thing can feel. Like, you're willing to cause harm. And then if you're like, no, wait a minute. Like, look, like really, like there's a very like the distinction between animal and plant here is kind of grey. Like, when we're talking about like what an animal is and why we're considering it, really we're talking about sentience, and that's why we use words like cruelty and exploitation. But like in terms of like actual pain and pleasure, this oyster's more like a plant. If you were making that argument with them, I think you'd kind of get them to see why you are still vegan. But you'd have to. But I think many of them would probably expect the evidence to say oysters aren't, and fall on the side of moral hazard, which I think is kind of cool. Like, I'd rather them do that. But like at the same time, yeah, like I think that ultimately it's the way to stop dogmatism. Like, we need people who are internally critical. You know.
Yeah, I just, in terms of like being efficient or effective in my advocacy, I feel like arguing with other vegans may not yield a positive outcome compared to talking to others about reducing suffering or
You say that, but then talking to vegans and preventing them from being dogmatic means that you can essentially enable the movement itself to be non-dogmatic in its approach, so that those other vegans that you're speaking to are less likely to go up to others and make claims which are demonstrably false. So I was in a vegan movement at one point, and we were campaigning against people riding camels, like through this like show. And some of the vegans were arguing that it was really cold, and that camels like would like they live in the desert. And it's like, look, man, this is nowhere near as fucking cold as the desert at night. Don't make claims like that are just stupid, because that camel can take this cold better than you can. Like, you know what I mean? And like you kind of gotta tell them, like, don't go and start saying camels don't like the cold, because it has nothing to fucking do about the cold. It has everything to do with them riding the fucking camels, and the way that they're being treated. And I think that's kind of the thing that we need to do. We need to remove the dogmatism, because as soon as you've got dogmatism in any movement, it's a waste of fucking time. And I mean, like, all you have to do is look at American politics. Shit, like, nothing more dogmatic than that. No internal critique, all external critique. All they do is fight amongst each other, and they're both demonstrably wrong. So, like, it's kind of the thing. I don't want vegans to become like, or another example is like blind theists and blind atheists, where they basically fight amongst each other, and neither of them can explain why God exists or not, doesn't exist, and why they've got a position of why they should expect the other person to believe or not to believe, and in reality they just throw insults at each other. These are the things that we need to prevent veganism from falling into with like meat eaters, because ultimately then it just becomes like would just become another aesthetic ideal.
Is there kind of a value in having that aesthetic ideal where you have like a strict definition without that nuance? Because here's my experience with going from veganism and then incorporating antinatalism into my philosophy. When I started that podcast, we're going on like year 2. The purpose was to explore multiple people's perspectives of what the philosophy is of procreative ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And after so many episodes, so many activists and philosophers, I don't even know what the word means anymore. Like and I feel like that's a little bit of a problem, because sure, there's the popular Benatarian antinatalism, but then you got the Cabrera antinatalism, you got the Shifrin Ashiel Singh, or there's multiple philosophers that are nuanced in what they're saying is the reason against antinatalism. And you've had, I don't know, like 5 people on. They all have different reasons, right?
Yeah. Every single person I've talked to.
And honestly, I haven't defended my position. Here's the thing: I don't agree with them, the people that you've talked to. So my antinatalism is going to be a totally different one whenever we do our thing. So
every antinatalist I've talked to has been highly educated, though. That's the thing. Like, I can honestly say that every antinatalist I've talked to has been like really philosophically instantiated, considering that like and like engaged in ethics, like way better than like everyone else I've debated. Like debating like political movements and shit like that. It's so much like or like carnists and stuff. Like I'm yet to meet a debate like opponent that usually is of a higher standard than an anti-natalist, which is except for Superhuman Dance, although you will proclaim the absolute opposite.
Yeah, right.
But
But see, here's the thing: is that now, if I was to advocate for this, if I was to be like a movement, and and you have all these definitions, then how do you even have a single clear message that you want to talk about to the public? You know what I mean?
100%, but I think that there is a shared overall goal in the function of antinatalism, which is basically to stop procreation and to condemn procreation as a whole. Which is why, like, every conversation I've had with an antinatalist has usually ended in the same sort of way, where I'm like, you need to make a claim of why it's wrong to have kids in all circumstances. And then you get like soft and weak antinatalists. And that's where the definitions start to become a little bit blurry for me, because I'm like, what the fuck's a soft antinatalist? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I'm like, you mean it's just wrong to have kids sometimes? But then why did you say that's antinatalist? You know what I mean? Or unless they mean like, unless there is like some sort of like ethical superstructure, which like under this one circumstance, like it's like more of like an exception to the rule rather than like the rule only, like rather than like a normal dilemma. But you know, I think that like I always want to hear that rule, and I think that most antinatalists proclaim that they can make that rule, and I think that's what the shared function of the group is. Even if they do have different ways of arguing towards it and different ways to talking about why we shouldn't have kids, antinatalists don't want people having kids.
But okay, so the Franciones dislike the singers, right? And then the reducitarians think that the deontologists are wrong on this. And within the vegan movement, they're all doing this infighting thing, and I think it's healthy for the movement, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of agree with the Franciones, where they're like, you know, this kind of muddies the waters. It should just be, you don't use animals, you don't hurt them, period, done. But at the same time, morality is way more complex than just that simple
Yeah,
black and
yeah.
white.
I think it. Well, of course, but I think this is the whole point of being non-dogmatic. We can all agree not to cause unnecessary suffering to animals, that it's wrong, that we need to respect animals in some sort of way, and that they're ethically considerable. And that's really the point of the vegan movement, to expand the sphere of ethics. But we're not really promoting a given, ethical, normative position. And I think that that's vital to prevent dogmatism in and of itself. As soon as you start like, oh well, we're all Hegelians, and then like something goes wrong, and then like, fuck, well, I guess it's okay to kill animals now because the world's utilitarian. Like, well, no, like, you know, it's not how it works. Like, the consideration of animals is compatible with almost every theory of ethics, which is what like people are, which is good, which is why we can kind of show that, and it usually does well for the movement. And also, just just in case Superhuman Dance sees this, Superhuman Dance, I think you're an alright guy. I mean, my discourse was somewhat spicy, but I think you're an alright guy. I don't think you're the worst person I've ever spoke to, or anything. But yeah, I think you could do with reading a little bit more philosophy. That's just a personal opinion, maybe, rather than just calling us like crazy. So yeah, I'll be there. But anyway, continue.
No comment on that, but but okay, so like if I guess when it comes to the ethics and philosophy, like you'd be comfortable saying that I am a vegan, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, but for someone who's now starting off in the vegan movement, and I say these edge cases, and they're like, it kind of challenges that in-group dynamic, or that dogmatism, and I feel like, would they be justified in saying that I'm not a vegan? Because like,
Well, yeah,
right now,
that's the
right
beautiful,
now, the vegan society.
thing. The beautiful thing is, like, I would say that the fight for whether you are or not a vegan is really a fight about what veganism is. It's not about you.
Right.
It's about the position from which is what the justification entailed by your position, right? So we're talking about like the ethical foundations of the consideration of animals, and whether it's animals as a whole or whether it's sentience. And I think that like, and whether, or even specifically, whether you can be cruel to something which is not sentient, or whether, and that makes sense. And I think that's probably where whether the definition is applicable to oysters or not. And that's what's really happening here. So when they're saying that you're not vegan, they're actually making, it's not that you're not vegan, they're saying that wait a minute, that's not what I understand veganism to be. And you're saying, well, no, that's not what I understand veganism to be. And ultimately, it removes the dogmatism of like, this is just like, we all have an implicit understanding of veganism and we'll work together to do some sort of shared goal from which we don't understand fully. And I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. A little bit of infighting is 100% healthy. And like, there's nothing more concerning when you see, like, for example, a political party which is almost unanimous on all of its decisions. Like when you see political parties make like very unanimous, quick decisions, it's usually that there is either a hierarchy there that's telling them how to think, and rather than actually allowing for discourse, or they all agree implicitly, in which case all of their conclusions are usually dogmatic and it's that and wrong. Uh, and so it's like I don't trust like any political party that's like, and I think this is something I would accuse of the until something like Brexit actually. I would have accused the Conservatives of being very dogmatic in that respect, and the Republicans, and even the Democrats and stuff. It happens all the time. But I think it's a bad thing. I think that internal critique is necessary for a non-dogmatic movement.
I think on your Discord or on other chats, another thing that Buck brought up that made me feel uncomfortable. I do consider myself a socialist, but when I see vegans, and I don't know if you've seen this, say you can't be a vegan if you're a capitalist. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a bit nonsense, if I'm honest. Unless you can instantiate why capitalism is like, bad in the first place, and like obviously you could believe that it may be the case that veganism and capitalism are, ethically underpinned by, like, I would say that you should become a socialist for the same reason you should become a vegan, right? And I'll say that all the fucking time. But the capitalist is most likely making an ethical claim from which I have to argue against. So if you're a vegan and a capitalist, you're probably going to say like, no, capitalism is good for sentient beings. Here's why, right? And I think that unless you're willing to engage on like the ethics of capitalism versus socialism, I think that it's wrong to say that all capitalists aren't vegan. You could say that the like capitalist vegans are misled, but they very well might believe that capitalism's a good thing for sentient beings, or non-exploitative, things like that. So, or not exploitative by nature or whatever it is, like by definition. So, like I don't think it's fair to say that all capitalists aren't vegan. I don't think that's fair. I think that you could say that like capitalism is fundamentally opposed or diametrically opposed to veganism, in terms of the exploitation of sentient beings, and you could as a socialist could make that critique, and it's one that I would make, that like vegans should go socialist, but ultimately I'm not going to say that a capitalist vegan is not a vegan if they are arguing for the moral consideration of all sentient beings. They're just making a separate conclusion to me in terms of ethics, and they'll have their own argument. I'd engage with their argument rather than engage in ad hominems.
Do you in your local group, do you have these types of debates?
I don't go to the local group anymore, so it's hard to say. Like, it's not that they were like bad or anything. I don't. Some of the outreach wasn't for me, like in terms of like how it was done. But like obviously, I actually succeeded better online. I think in terms of like my personal engagement. Also, I had some issues in terms of like actually like going to the group and stuff like that, which I think wasn't like really good for the group. Like I couldn't make sure that I got there every weekend and stuff. So I'm here online advocating for veganism. But like I just think it's funny because it's like, I'm here telling you about like, well, maybe you should engage with your local. It's like why don't I go to the Marxists or the other vegans anymore? And it's like the Marxists, like I left in one respect because I don't want to bring up I don't want to bring it up. You think? Okay. I didn't like some of the approaches of some of the people that were, if I'm honest, in the group. Not because I thought they were bad people or anything, but because I thought their approach was a little bit too militant, and I think not effective. And I think it can be difficult to bring up, and I understand that. And that was one issue. But then there was other issues with us even getting there and stuff as well. So I don't even think it was worth us bringing it up. I went to an AV meeting once, and I felt a little bit alienated from one of those. But then I did just kind of turn up with a microphone and stuff. So they probably were like, what's this kid doing? Or they still accepted us. And then like a microphone and camera. And then the Marxists, I realized that they were really tanky-y. And I started to get annoyed because all the Marxists, well, they weren't tanky-y. They were like, I don't know, they were a bit like, I became more of an anarchist, so I kind of moved away from that ideology a little bit. So I don't know.
So the reason I brought that up, my experience has been sort of similar to yours. When I joined the vegan movement, I went from I started off with like the atheist movement, the skeptic movement, and then went vegan. And I noticed a lot of pseudoscience within the community, and a lot of people advocating that I don't take medication, that I don't get vaccinated, and stuff like that.
They're just fucking dumb.
And and that really upset me because I'm like, how did I go from what I
That's why the
assume is a
possible and
rational.
practicable as well is like in the definition for a reason. It's because like, look, we consider things in terms of what we can, and what we can consider what is possible. Like, you know, ought implies can, ought implies can, and then practicable. You know, as you say, it's like reasonable. It's like what is like what would what can be a minimum standard for your engagement in ethics. Like not being vaccinated isn't really an option. And I think that like, yeah, I think
And now with COVID, you know, like I could maybe be a little bit less upset about the flu vaccine, but now that COVID is here, like there's been some of my friends that are not just saying they're not going to do it for themselves, but that actively are promoting that we shouldn't get vaccinated because it's not vegan.
I think that's
And
dumb. I
like
think
this
that's
is where
really
I don't even
dumb.
want to be associated with that type of
Y-
community
no,
anymore.
no,
You know what
no.
I
I
mean?
think we've got to. I think we've got to just go like so. For example, I'm a vegan and go get the COVID vaccine. You know, I care about sentient beings. Please go get the COVID vaccine. You know what I mean? Like, I think that they shouldn't have used animal testing. If I'm honest, and I think that AstraZeneca is not used with animal products. So, I mean, if you can get that, that's cooler, I suppose. But unless you can create, like, you know, it's possible and practicable. Yeah, I think that like applies there. And we should just advocate. That's where we start advocating for political change. Like, not test on animals. We shouldn't be testing medication on animals. We shouldn't be using animal products. Like, yeah. So, like, that's.
Do you think that if you were in that local group and you were to talk about these things, do you think that would be well received?
Probably not. But then, you know, change requires people to feel uncomfortable, and I think that ultimately, you've got to we've just kind of got to do it, haven't we? It's kind of shit. Like I hate having to do these things myself. Like, it's like the same with being vegan as a general law. Like in general, like usually as a vegan, I'm not well received. So it doesn't make us that like upset. Do you know what I mean? I'm not received well by anyone. Like I
Well,
can
that's the
live
thing.
with
The more philosophy I read, the more I feel like I'm getting
alienated from the world.
alienated from everything. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's how
So
many?
like
There's like a few
well, you know, I was a
philosophers.
Christian, and then I became an atheist, so I left that community, and then I went into the atheist movement, but found some of them into pseudoscience, so I became more into scientific skepticism. Then I became vegan, so I kept leaving groups and groups and groups, and
You
now
don't. I don't
it's
think you
like
need
I
to
don't belong to anything.
like. So, for example, like you don't need to leave the groups. A lot of the time, you just need to like the groups themselves need to be changed. And unless you have like rational, capable individuals within them, then the groups themselves will continue to be dogmatic. And so like you're leaving the idle talk, but that doesn't mean that you should stop talking to people.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess this is why I prefer this mode of activism,
The
having these
on
conversations
hundred
openly.
percent, 100%. Like, look, like so. For example, everyone in chat, thank you for watching. 145 people here, right? You know what I mean? If I was on the street, like, would I have
Yeah,
145 people watching us?
yeah, that's more than I would have done in like a weekend. So yeah.
Yeah, like that's actually my girlfriend was just saying that like veganism's not about vegans, it's about the animals, you know, like it's like she was just saying like there was like it's not about us. And a lot of people I think as vegans like usually like really associate hard with the identity, and I think that's like missing the point of the ethic as well. Um and yeah, like and I agree, like even when I was like when I was even like if you're doing good activism, like I'll never get through that many people. 145 people talking like to talk about veganism. It's like many of them might be vegan already. Like, don't get me wrong, but like people can share the stream, it can be viewed afterwards, and it ultimately it's better for, I think, in terms of what I can do. I think it ultimately leads to a better conclusion. So yeah, I mean, hopefully like we can be more effective in war activism, and I think that like street activism does have its place. Like, and I think one of the best things about street activism is when you film street activism. I think AV does a really good job with that, like in terms of like
they do.
And I think like even people like Earthland Ed is fucking so valuable. Like Earthland Ed is so important for the movement. And like even the people that I used to campaign with really cared about animals, and I can't deny that. Like, and I really value how much they cared about animals. Like they genuinely care, and they're willing to put themselves into like awkward and unfamiliar situations with people, and that's not pleasant. So even though like there's times when I've disagreed with the means in which they've engaged with others, I'm at least happy that they're willing to engage with others around the ethic, and I have big respect for that.
That's true. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess you convinced me. Thanks, Lewis. I'll continue using the label.
All right, that's cool, man. Nice to have you on. Glad to see you. Do you still have your channel?
Yeah, I have both the channels. Yeah, and eventually I hope we can have a
link is your
conversation
channel. I'll
about
post it in.
ethics.
I was gonna say link is your channel. I'll post it in. I'll post it in the description. Just quickly, cool. So I can like just otherwise I'll have to like click around. But
okay, yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, and I'll post it in the description. Everyone, check out Mark. He's an antinatalist, runs the Antinatalist podcast, and fucking sick discussions with people like David Benatar. And I like how you're just having a casual conversation with David Benatar. Like, I was just chatting to Benatar the other day. Just one of the most famous philosophers in the antinatalist movement, and he's we're just chilling. And we're just talking about whether we should be calling ourselves vegan in that. That's pretty cool. Tell Benatar that I'll debate him, please. Let him know.
Okay, yeah. I definitely want to get you involved with because right now I'm doing philosophy of death, and I've talked to some of the people that are involved in the International Association for Death and Dying, and I very much would like your input on some of those things, and I think it would be rewarding.
Yeah, man. Like I actually studied the philosophy of death at Masters. One of me lecturers wrote the book. I think it was actually called Death, and it was by David Scarr. Which is
yeah.
So like he was one of me lecturers. At Masters.
Are you a deprivationist or?
Honestly, I can't even remember anything about the philosophy of death. I can't remember a fucking thing. I just remember like struggling to like get through it, and like with everything else that was going on. So I'm not. I don't even know.
Okay. But yeah, that's my my month's plan to talk about the philosophy of death and then move on to other subjects. I'm more than just the antinatalist, so just putting that out there.
That's cool. Like, obviously, I think it's like I'm more than a vegan, more than a woman. Like we've got to have more than just a single identity. And I think that we'll all do.
Yeah.
Well, also, what is deprivationism?
So you remember when Epicurus made that quote about how death doesn't harm us because once we're here.
Oh, you mean are we harmed after death?
Yeah, and so right. Nagel was like, yeah, it does deprive us of the goods that could potentially happen and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah, okay. I didn't know the term. Yeah, I actually wrote that we couldn't be harmed after death, but we can be harmed in relation to our understanding of death whilst being alive. And so living in a society which harms the dead harms the living, which is ultimately bad. And I wrote about that. Like, I remember, I think, the hell did I? Actually, I'm going to be able to hunt out me essay. See if I can hunt out what I wrote on, just because we're talking about the philosophy of death. I haven't done this in so long. Death.
Yeah, and David Boonin actually argues that the dead can be harmed. I haven't read into that yet, but that's why I'm interested in the topic. I find it like philosophically puzzling.
Yeah, I think Donna Scar argued for that as well. I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. It depends on obviously your theory of ethics as well. Anyway, but anyway, thanks man for coming on, and obviously we can talk about the philosophy of death at some point. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Take care, man.
Take it easy. Have a nice night. Right. Okay. So probably gonna go off soon. So if you've got a question that you'd like me to answer, drop it in the chat. I'll answer your questions. And if you want to skip ahead of the queue, donate via the Streamlabs donation link in the description. And Mark, remember to send me the link. Lewis, can you say anything about Rawls' theory of contractionism? I'm writing a paper and could use some feedback. Honestly, contractarianism, if you want a solid fucking argument, if you're writing a paper and you want to shock your lecturers in like an argument against social contract theory, give me 2 seconds. I'll find. It depends on you. Like, wait a minute, what is it about? Actually, what's your question? What's your question? Before I go and give you some sort of like random like critique and stuff of social contract theory, and I'll make some points on it. Why are you gay? With scientific skepticism, it sounds very dumb. Ow. Reincarnation is true. Many people have already died. You have to define dead. If your reincarnation is true, then many people have already died. Well, I'm having to try and criticize it from question, Mark? I don't know why I call you a question. Just, yeah. BP seems nice, but he couldn't explain morality to save his life. In my opinion, if you haven't read anything, is his best argument. There's at least a chance that books don't contain good information. Well, no, look, like if you want to know what morality is, like I would say, like in terms of like, I would usually relate it to ethics for one, not just morality, because I think that this is where we get bogged down. But like in terms of morality, I'd say like it's usually the focus of like the codes of like codes of behavior. If we're talking about like what people normally actually mean, like we talk about codes of behavior and like how we should live our lives. And I think the best way to engage with the question of like in questions of morality and ethics is usually the way the Greeks did, which is like, what is the good life? How can I live the good life? I'd love to talk about egotism as I'm an ethical. I think you mean do you mean egoist, not egotist? Because egotism is separate from egoism. Not to be pedantic, because I'm pretty sure egotism is excessively conceited or absorbed in oneself, and I don't think that you want to express yourself, Dari, as an egotist. I'd love to call in some time and to get your input. Yeah, man. You can ask questions as well by joining the Patreon. Patreon, I do like live Q&As, and also I'll be doing that soon. I've actually got something to go up on Patreon tonight, which is actually a conversation between me, Cosmic Skeptic, and Rationality Rules. So yeah, that's going to be like you can. I'm going to be doing like Patreon only call-ins. So if you want to get on that, then you can do it. Otherwise, just DM us on Discord, and I'll see if I can get you on. I feel like the philosophical arguments on veganism aren't very effective because they tend to be abstract instead of concrete. How you find philosophy to be effective at swaying people? Yeah, because it's of like Socratic method. A lot of the time people are making judgments in relation to like why we should be vegan or not be vegan and so on, in terms of preconceived notions, and I think philosophy allows you to question those and offer something in its stead. And don't worry, Dari, do I know the channel by the name of Spherage? Unfortunately I do. PP, did you read the news that Frege plagiarized the Stoics? No. Is rationality rules vegan? Um, no, I don't think so yet. He should be. Like, he keeps saying that it's right, but then it's too convenient and all this. So he's actually just morally deficit at this point. But he says that. He's like, I'm a bad guy. Actually, watch the discussion. You'll see. Yeah, we'll talk about it. It's actually talking about why he's not vegan and, like, ethics. In relation to the philosophy of death and how we should interpret and engage with it, and on the absolute and even pragmatic level, are there any shape or form acquainted with the work of Professor Shelley Kagan? He is a professor at Yale, and he has given a ton of lectures on YouTube if you're interested in discovering his views. PPS, we need PP hands. Yeah, man. I'll check out the lectures, though. It's cool. Hey, Dynamic. How you doing?
Curlicue donated £5. I DM'd you a question.
All right, cool. Thanks, Curlicue. You could have just, like, I'm pretty sure you're, like, a patron. You could have just, like, said in chat, and I would have just got you on. And, like, or whatever you like. You can ask a question, man. You're already a patron. Pretty sure you get, like, call-ins with your, like, the silver-souled citizen status. So you don't need to, next time, just, like, DM us and let us know. Just add us in chat, and I'll answer you first anyway, because of the patron status. How do you connect moral reasoning with moral action? So I would not divorce rationality and desire in the first place. I would say that the understanding of one's desires includes propositional states from the agent understanding the world. Egotists based in ethics of personal desire, which is actionable. Virtue ethics based on ethics of an individual pursuit of eudaimonia. I know you use desire as a metaphysical grounding to define good and bad, but how do you make the jump from something being good and you being obliged to do that which is good without just assuming it? One example is, how could people accept veganism but still use excuses like convenience? Thanks for the stream. So I would say that ultimately, and thank you for the donation as well, Curlicue. I would say that if the individual understood desire and desire itself and the reasons behind why something is bad, they would be motivated to action implicitly. So I would say that they would be able to say, it not only is it the right thing to do in some sort of abstract sense, it's the right thing for me to do. And so they would have to be making the decision to do the wrong thing for them, in which case I'm either going to accuse them of being, like, irrational and perhaps mentally ill in that respect, incapable of freeing themselves from fictions. But I think a lot of the time I would just say, like, look, I think that it, like, rationality and the motivating aspect of emotion should not be differentiated in terms of drives in the first place. And I think that's the position that Alistair McIntyre brings up in Critique of Plato in A Brief History of Ethics. So at the point, so if you can find that, a copy of that, Alistair McIntyre, I think, talks about why that's an issue in Plato when he differentiates reason from drives. When I would say, in reality, your actions in the world drive you to be rational, and as rational as possible. So I hope that answers your question, Curlicue. And thanks for the link, question mark. I'll just drop that into copybook. 1 second. So we'll check out that link in the description, everyone. Go sub to Mark. He's a cool guy. And also make sure you sub to Vegan Gaze. How do I explain evolution if I'm an idealist? There must have been something that created the first brain. It's more of like metaphysics. It's like I'd say that what we understand as reality didn't exist until there was mind. I know you I got to get reading Alistair McIntyre, but in undergrad, so have so little time. I know what you mean, but it depends on what are you studying. If you're studying ethics and you get the chance, do go for Alistair McIntyre because he will help you so much in that undergrad degree. He'll just give you loads of information. He's like an actual fountain of knowledge. Did you see my response about social contract theory? I didn't, man. I didn't see the response. You're stuck in a form of error theory from the concerns about epistemic injustices, from moral statements, from metaphysical realm of dialectical hermeneutics. What would you say to that? Say, what the hell are you talking about? I'd have to unpack it with you, Caden. I'm stuck in a form of error theory, but the concerns about epistemic injustice. Like, what do you mean? Like, not? Do you mean like? Are you responding to like a master-slave dialectic and the problems of objective ethics in relation to the sadomasochistic relationship that like Sartre talks about, like the individual this like the issues of an epistemic the epistemic failures of power within our social institutions. Is that the issue? Essentially what you're talking about, our ethical institutions, Caden. Kind of like a Marxian critique of Hegel almost. Miranda Fricka talks about epistemic injustice. It's the first time I've ever heard that. Specifically in okay, but that sounds like almost Hegelian. Yeah, like Hegelian or like existential. Okay, I think I get it. If you want to talk about it, we can talk about like how to overcome the issues of power within our dialectical relationships with the other, and how it affects objective ethics. Because this has become this is a problem in general, and it leads to people taking like some pretty like niche approaches. I can't remember the postmodernist that does it, but they argue that the proletariat will not have a conception of justice until they reach liberation and stuff. I have to work out. It wasn't Derrida. Foucault quotes them, so I can't remember who it was. Are philosophers less likely to go to therapy? I assume many of them think they're too smart for that. I have no idea. On average, I think that therapy is brilliant. We should definitely go to therapy. I think it depends on the kind of therapy and the therapist, of course. Like, obviously, it's all. I think that everyone would understand that. Like, obviously, it depends. But yeah, therapy's good. I think that being a philosopher, like, in my engagement in therapy, me therapist said that me grasp of the concepts and stuff that we're talking about showed like a good understanding of self, which was useful for the therapy and stuff. So, I don't know. My therapist seemed to think it was somewhat a good thing. What do I think about the ethics of porn? I'm actually going to do a video on that, so I'll hold off because I'm going to be doing a whole video on that on Aldo. Okay. Okay, guys, I'm going to call the stream there. But I thank you everyone who's taken the time out of the day to come watch. If you like the stream, please give it a thumbs up. And like, it's really been cool, like having so many viewers, like on average, man. What the fuck? So fucking cool. Thanks everyone for turning up. It's really appreciated. And yeah, so I hope I'll see you all tomorrow for the debate with the fascist. And for all you patrons, I will be uploading my conversation with Cosmic Skeptic and Rationality Rules on veganism, more realism, and some other stuff in terms of like the Cartesian understanding of mind, hopefully tonight or tomorrow. So patrons, I promise I've got content coming for you soon. Sorry for the lack of live stream so far. I've got this coming, so I've been working on this. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you again, Ethan Pollitt, for supporting this stream. And as always, try to gain some perspective.